They say heroes don't exist anymore, that the world's too broken, too cold for miracles. But on December 19th, 2024, a janitor proved them all wrong when he ran straight into hell itself to save a child he'd never met. What he didn't know? That little girl had been watching him for months, waiting for the moment their lives would collide. This is the story of Ethan Miles, a man who lost everything, only to risk his life for a stranger's daughter. Watch until the end and comment your city so I can see how far this story travels. The wind off Lake Michigan cut through Chicago like a blade made of winter itself, slicing past the skeletal trees and rattling the windows of Gold Coast mansions that stood like monuments to excess. It was the kind of cold that made your bones ache, that turned your breath into ghosts, that reminded you how small and fragile you really were against the indifference of nature. Ethan Miles knew that cold intimately. He walked through it every night at 11:30, after his shift ended at the Morrison Tower downtown, where he pushed a mop across marble floors that cost more per square foot than he made in a month. His uniform, navy blue with his name stitched in fading yellow thread, hung loose on his frame. He'd lost weight over the years, the kind that came not from dieting but from forgetting to care, from meals skipped because cooking for one felt like admitting defeat. His route home never changed. East on Erie Street, then north on Dearborn, cutting through the heart of the neighborhood where old money whispered behind iron gates and new money shouted from glass towers. He could have taken the bus, could have saved himself 20 minutes of walking through the bitter December nights, but Ethan walked because it hurt, and somewhere deep in the damaged architecture of his soul, he believed he deserved that hurt. 5 years. It had been 5 years since the fire that took everything, 5 years since he'd heard his wife Sarah's laugh, since he'd watched his daughter Emma draw elaborate houses with too many windows, since he'd tossed his son Jacob into the air and caught him, both of them laughing like the world was nothing but joy. 5 years since he'd fallen asleep on the couch after a grueling week at the architecture firm he'd co-founded, since he'd woken to smoke and screams, since he'd tried, God, how he'd tried, to get back inside before the firefighters held him back, before the roof collapsed, before his entire world turned to ash and nightmare. The doctors said it was smoke inhalation that killed them, that they'd lost consciousness before the flames reached them. The doctors said this like it was supposed to help, like the method of death somehow softened the permanence of it. Ethan didn't tell them that it didn't help, that every night for 5 years he'd replayed those moments, had rewritten them in 1,000 different ways, where he woke up sooner, where he smelled the smoke, where he saved them. He'd been 37 then. Ethan Miles, rising star in Chicago's architectural scene, partner at Grant & Miles Design, the firm that had just won the commission to redesign Navy Pier's Eastern Pavilion. He'd had everything: the beautiful wife who taught elementary school and believed in the goodness of people, the kids who were brilliant and weird and perfect, the career that let him shape the city's skyline, the future that stretched out like an endless highway. Now, at 42, he was a janitor. He cleaned the offices of people who worked in buildings he used to design. He lived in a studio apartment in Pilsen that smelled like the Mexican restaurant downstairs. He owned 4 shirts, 2 pairs of jeans, and a winter coat held together by duct tape and stubbornness. He had no friends. They'd all tried in the beginning, had called and visited and insisted he wasn't alone. But eventually, even the most loyal gave up when faced with the wall of silence and self-destruction he'd built around himself. The only thing he'd kept from his old life was the route. Erie to Dearborn, through the Gold Coast, past the mansion at 1847 North Dearborn Street. He told himself it was because it was the most direct path, that it had nothing to do with the fact that the mansion had once belonged to Daniel Grant, his best friend and business partner, the man who'd been like a brother to him, the man who'd died of a heart attack 6 months after Ethan's family burned. Daniel's widow, Clara, still lived there with their daughter. Ethan had never stopped to talk to them, had never even let Clara know he walked past every night. What would he say? That he was sorry he'd abandoned the firm after Daniel died, leaving her to run it alone while she grieved? That he was sorry he'd donated his share of the company's worth, nearly $3 million, to the memorial fund Clara had established in Daniel's name, then disappeared? That he was haunted by the fact that Daniel had died of a heart attack triggered by stress that came from trying to hold the firm together after Ethan had fallen apart? So he walked past, night after night, and he didn't stop. He was a ghost haunting his own life, and ghosts didn't knock on doors. Ghosts didn't ask for forgiveness. They just drifted through the cold and the dark, remembering what it felt like to be alive. Tonight, December 19th, was particularly brutal. The temperature had dropped to 8 degrees, and the wind chill made it feel closer to -10. Ethan's breath came in ragged clouds as he trudged up Dearborn, his hands shoved deep in his pockets, his shoulders hunched against the cold. The street was quiet. Most sensible people already home and warm, already settled in for the night with their families, their safety, their tomorrows. As he approached 1847, he did what he always did, glanced up at the second-floor window where a light usually glowed. He didn't know why he looked. Maybe it was a way of checking that life continued, that someone in the world was okay, that his failure to save his own family didn't mean everyone was doomed. The light was on. It was always on at this hour. Ethan had created an entire mythology around that light in his head. A child who couldn't sleep, who read books under the covers, who dreamed of being an astronaut or a doctor, or whatever kids dreamed of these days. He'd never seen the child clearly, just occasional shadows against the curtains, but somehow that light had become a ritual, a checkpoint that marked another day survived. He was about to look away, to continue his march toward home and another night of not quite sleeping, when something made him stop. Call it instinct. Call it the architect's eye for detail that never quite died. Call it fate. Whatever it was, it made him pause and really look at the mansion. Something was wrong. At first, he couldn't place it. The house looked the same as always. 3 stories of elegant limestone, tall windows that glowed with warm light, the black iron fence that surrounded the property, the pristine snow on the lawn that the grounds crew maintained even in winter. But there was something, smoke, just a wisp of it, barely visible in the darkness, curling from one of the first-floor windows. Ethan's heart kicked into a different rhythm. He told himself he was imagining it, that it was just steam from a heating vent, that it was nothing. But even as he thought this, he was moving toward the gate, his exhausted feet suddenly alive with purpose, his mind already calculating distances and possibilities. The smoke was thicker now, definitely smoke, not steam, dark and ugly against the night sky. "No," Ethan whispered. The word came out strangled, desperate. "No, no, no!" He was running now, running toward the nightmare he thought he'd left behind 5 years ago. His hands found the iron gate and he shook it, but it was locked. The electronic lock requiring a code he didn't have. The fence was 7 feet tall, topped with decorative spikes that were suddenly very much in his way. "Fire!" he screamed, his voice cracking with the force of it. "Someone call 911! Fire!" The houses around him remained dark and silent. Either no one heard him or no one cared, safely insulated behind their walls and their security systems, and their assumptions that bad things happen to other people. Ethan backed up 3 steps, then ran at the fence. His hands found purchase on the cold iron and he hauled himself up, his muscles screaming in protest, his coat catching on the spikes at the top. He didn't care. He threw himself over, landing hard on the other side, his ankle twisting beneath him. Pain shot up his leg, but he ignored it, limping running toward the house. The front windows showed the horror clearly now. Flames danced in what looked like the living room, orange and hungry, spreading faster than should be possible. The fire was already too big, too established. This wasn't a fire that had just started. This had been burning for a while. Why hadn't the alarms gone off? Where were the fire trucks? Why was the house so quiet? Ethan reached the front door and grabbed the handle. Locked. Of course it was locked. It was nearly midnight, and this was a mansion in the Gold Coast. He pounded on the door with both fists. "Clara! Clara Grant! Fire! Get out!" No response. Just the muffled roar of flames eating through a house that was supposed to be safe, that was supposed to protect the people inside. Ethan stumbled back from the door, his mind racing. The fire was in the front of the house, which meant the back might still be clear. He ran along the side of the building, his damaged ankle protesting every step, until he reached the back entrance. This door was also locked, but next to it was a window, and windows could be broken. He looked around desperately for something heavy, anything, and his eyes landed on a decorative stone frog sitting next to the back steps. He grabbed it. God, it was heavier than it looked, and hurled it through the window. The glass exploded inward with a crash that seemed impossibly loud in the quiet night, Ethan knocked away the remaining shards with his elbow, felt them slice through his coat and into his skin, then hauled himself through the opening. He landed in what looked like a mudroom, boots and coats neatly arranged, a dog's water bowl on the floor. Normal. Everything looked so terrifyingly normal, except for the smoke that was already starting to fill the air. "Clara!" he shouted again. "Amelia! Anyone!" The name surprised him. Amelia. He hadn't known he knew the child's name, but apparently some part of his brain had filed away that information, had cataloged it during those nightly glances at the lit window. He moved deeper into the house, staying low where the air was clearer. The layout was similar to what he remembered from the one time Daniel had invited him over for dinner, back when they were both young architects with everything ahead of them. Kitchen to the left, dining room straight ahead, living room beyond that where the fire was now consuming everything. The smoke was getting thicker. Ethan pulled his shirt up over his mouth and nose, trying to filter the air, but it wasn't enough. His eyes were watering, his lungs already starting to burn. He'd been here before, had breathed this same deadly air 5 years ago, and his body remembered the trauma even if his conscious mind tried to push it away. "Where are you?" His voice was raw, desperate. A sound, faint but definitely there, a voice high-pitched and terrified coming from upstairs. "Help! Help! Mommy!" Ethan's heart stopped, then started again, beating so hard it hurt. There was a child upstairs. Of course there was. The lit window, the one he'd seen every night for months. She was up there, and the fire was between him and the stairs. He had a choice. He could go back the way he came, could run outside and wait for the fire department, could let the professionals handle it. That was the smart choice, the safe choice, the choice that wouldn't end with him dead. But Ethan Miles had stopped making smart choices 5 years ago, when he'd failed to save his own children. And some part of him, the part that had died with Sarah and Emma and Jacob, suddenly saw a chance at redemption, no matter how impossible. He ran toward the fire. The heat hit him like a physical wall. The living room was fully engulfed, flames crawling up the walls and across the ceiling, consuming furniture and memories and family photos with indiscriminate hunger. The stairs were on the far side of the room, partially obscured by smoke but still visible, still theoretically passable. Ethan didn't think. Thinking would have stopped him. He took a breath of the least terrible air he could find and sprinted through hell. The fire reached for him with eager fingers. He felt his coat catch, smelled burning fabric, and beneath that the sickening scent of his own hair singeing. The heat was incredible, a living thing that wanted to consume him. His eyes were clenched shut against the smoke and the brightness, but he knew where the stairs were, had memorized their position in that split second before he ran. His shoulder hit the newel post hard enough to spin him around, but it also told him he'd made it. He grabbed the railing and hauled himself upward, taking the steps 2 at a time, his lungs screaming for air he couldn't give them. The second floor was clearer. The smoke hadn't fully reached here yet, though it was filling fast, pouring up the stairwell like a malevolent flood. "Where are you?" Ethan gasped. "Here! We're here! Help us!" The voice was coming from the left, from the room with the window that was always lit. Ethan staggered toward it, his body already shutting down from the smoke and heat and sheer terror of what he was doing. The door was closed. He tried the handle and found it locked. Not from the inside, from the outside. Someone had locked them in. That realization cut through the panic, sharp and clear and horrifying. This wasn't an accident. This was murder. But that was a problem for later, for the police, for people who were still alive. Right now, there was just a door and the child behind it. Ethan stepped back and kicked the door as hard as he could. Pain exploded in his ankle, the one he'd already injured climbing the fence, but the door shuddered. He kicked again, and again, and again, putting 5 years of grief and guilt and rage into every blow. The door splintered. One more kick, and it flew open, hanging drunkenly on its hinges. Inside was a bedroom that looked like it belonged in a fairy tale. White furniture with gold accents, bookshelves overflowing with books, drawings taped to the walls, a reading nook by the window where the light still glowed. And in the middle of it all, pressed against the far wall, were 2 figures. The child, Amelia, 6 years old with dark hair and huge eyes that were red from crying and smoke, stood in front of her mother, who was slumped against the wall, blood trickling from a gash on her forehead. Clara Grant looked up at Ethan with a mixture of hope and disbelief. You, she whispered. Ethan? He didn't have time to be shocked that she recognized him, that she somehow knew he'd been walking past her house every night like a ghost, unable to leave the scene of his crimes. Can you walk? He asked, his voice nothing but smoke and gravel. Clara tried to stand, but her legs buckled. Hit my head. The door, couldn't get it open. Tried to call, but phones aren't working. The system... It's okay, Ethan interrupted. He knew it wasn't okay. That nothing about this was okay, but people needed to hear that lie when the world was ending. I'm going to get you out. He moved to Clara first, trying to help her up, but she pushed him away. Amelia, she insisted. Take Amelia first. Come back for me. I can't leave you. Take my daughter. Clara's voice was stronger than her body, powered by the same force that had kept mothers protecting their children since the beginning of time. Please, Ethan, take her. The smoke was filling the room now. They had seconds, maybe a minute if they were lucky. Ethan knelt in front of Amelia. The little girl was shaking, tears streaming down her face, but when she looked at him, something in her expression changed. Recognition, but different from her mother's. Deeper, older, like she'd been waiting for this exact moment. I knew you would come, she said. Her voice was so small, so certain. The words hit Ethan harder than the fire, harder than the smoke, harder than anything. What? From the window, I watched you every night. You always looked so sad. But I knew if we needed help, you would come. Something in Ethan's chest cracked open, something that had been frozen solid for 5 years. I'm here, he managed. Hold on to me, okay? Hold on tight and don't let go. Amelia nodded and wrapped her arms around his neck. She was so light, lighter than Jacob had been, lighter than seemed possible for a whole entire person. Ethan stood, then reached for Clara with his free arm. Come on, we're all getting out. Clara tried again to stand, and this time Ethan half carried, half dragged her upright. She leaned heavily against him, blood from her head wound staining his already ruined coat. The stairs, she gasped. Fire. I know, just trust me. Trust. What a word to use when he was leading them back toward the flames, when he had no idea if the stairs were even still passable, when every breath felt like inhaling broken glass. They made it to the hallway. The smoke was so thick now that Ethan couldn't see more than a few feet ahead. He kept one hand on the wall, using it to guide them toward where he knew the stairs had to be. Amelia's arms tightened around his neck, her face buried against his shoulder. Clara stumbled beside him, her weight increasing with every step as her body gave up. The stairs appeared suddenly through the smoke, and Ethan's heart sank. The fire had gotten worse, had spread from the living room into the foyer, had claimed the bottom third of the staircase. Flames licked up the banister and across the steps, turning their escape route into an obstacle course designed by hell itself. Oh, God, Clara whispered. Ethan, we can't. Yes, he said firmly. We can. Because what was the alternative? Wait up here for the fire to consume them? Jump from a second-story window and hope they survived the fall? Go back into one of the bedrooms and pray the fire department arrived in time? No. The only way out was through. Amelia, Ethan said, his mouth close to the little girl's ear. I need you to hold on as tight as you can, okay? Don't look, just hold on. Okay, she whispered back. Sean, I trust you. 3 words that weighed more than the world. 3 words he didn't deserve but would die trying to honor. Ethan tightened his grip on both Clara and Amelia, took the deepest breath he could manage of the poisoned air, and started down the stairs. The heat was unbearable. Ethan could feel his skin blistering, could smell burning fabric and hair and skin. The flames were on both sides of them now, reaching out like they recognized him, like they remembered him from 5 years ago, and wanted to finish what they'd started. Step. Another step. Clara stumbled and nearly took them all down, but Ethan caught her, his muscles screaming in protest. Another step. The flames were so close now he could feel individual tongues of fire licking at his arms, his back, his legs. Amelia whimpered but didn't let go. Halfway down. The stairs groaned beneath them, wood compromised by fire, ready to give way. Ethan didn't slow down. Slower meant longer in the flames, meant more time for the smoke to steal their remaining oxygen, meant a greater chance that these stairs would collapse and send them all into the inferno below. 3/4 of the way. Clara's weight was dead now, unconscious or close to it. Ethan was essentially carrying both of them, his body running on nothing but adrenaline and something older, something primal, the animal instinct that said, protect the young, save the innocent, get them out. The bottom of the stairs. The foyer was a nightmare of fire and smoke, but Ethan could see the front door through the chaos. 20 feet, 15, 10. The door was locked. The handle was hot enough to brand flesh. Ethan kicked it, once, twice, 3 times, and on the 4th try it crashed open, spilling them out onto the front steps into the cold December air that felt like heaven, like salvation, like being born again into a world where you could breathe. Ethan staggered forward onto the lawn, his legs finally giving out. He went down hard, turning his body at the last second so that he took the impact instead of Amelia. Clara collapsed next to them, barely conscious. Amelia was coughing, her small body racked with spasms, but she was breathing, she was alive, she was out. In the distance, sirens finally wailed. Too late to save the house, but maybe in time to save them. Ethan lay on the frozen grass, staring up at the night sky where stars were visible between the clouds of smoke. His body was a symphony of pain, burns, cuts, bruises, his lungs raw and damaged, his heart hammering against his ribs like it was trying to escape. He should move, should check on Clara and Amelia, should do something. But he couldn't. He'd used everything he had burned through 5 years of survival in a matter of minutes, and now there was nothing left. He'd gotten them out. That was all that mattered. Footsteps thundered across the lawn. The voices shouted. Hands touched him, checked him, started to move him. Paramedics, police, firefighters. The cavalry that arrived after the war was already won or lost. Sir, can you hear me? Sir, stay with us. Ethan tried to answer but couldn't form words. His vision was starting to tunnel, darkness creeping in from the edges. The little girl! A voice shouted. Get the little girl! I've got her. She's breathing. Mother too. Jesus, how did they get out? Him. Look at him. He brought them out. Through that? Through that fire? That's impossible. But Ethan had learned something in the last 10 minutes. Impossible was just another word for necessary. Impossible was what you did when the alternative was watching someone die. Impossible was just love and terror and guilt transformed into action. The darkness was taking him now, pulling him down into unconsciousness. Ethan let it come. For the first time in 5 years, he wasn't afraid to close his eyes. Because this time, when the fire came, he'd gotten them out. This time, he'd saved them. This time, impossible hadn't stopped him. His last conscious thought, before the darkness claimed him completely, was of Amelia's voice. I knew you would come. And then nothing. Just the cold grass beneath him, the winter sky above, and the sound of sirens singing their too late songs into the night. Ethan's sacrifice would change 3 lives forever, but neither Clara nor Amelia knew that the fire was no accident, and that the man who saved them was connected to their family in ways they couldn't imagine. The road to truth would be paved with revelations that would shake them to their core. The hospital smelled like antiseptic and desperation, a combination that Ethan's damaged lungs registered even through the oxygen mask strapped to his face. He woke in fragments, first aware of the beeping machines, then the scratchy hospital gown, then the IV line snaking into his arm, and finally the pain. God, the pain was everywhere. A full-body ache that radiated from the burns on his arms and back, the cuts from broken glass, the bruised ribs, the twisted ankle that had swollen to twice its normal size. A nurse appeared in his field of vision, her face kind but professionally neutral. Mr. Miles? Can you hear me? Don't try to talk yet. You've got some smoke damage to your lungs. Just nod if you understand. Ethan nodded, which hurt more than it should have. Everything hurt. You're at Northwestern Memorial. You've been unconscious for about 6 hours. It's 5 in the morning now. You have second-degree burns on approximately 15% of your body, multiple lacerations, possible broken ribs, and significant smoke inhalation. But you're going to be okay. She paused, and something in her expression softened. What you did was incredibly brave and incredibly stupid. The doctor will want to talk to you about the lung damage. You're going to need some time to heal." Ethan tried to speak, managed only a croak that sent fire through his throat. The nurse anticipated his question. "The little girl is fine. Some smoke inhalation, minor burns on her hands, but she's going to make a full recovery. Her mother has a concussion and needed stitches, but she's stable. You saved them both." The nurse adjusted something on one of the machines. "There are some people who want to talk to you, police, fire investigators, and Mrs. Grant has been asking about you every hour since they brought you all in, but that can wait until you're stronger." Mrs. Grant. Clara. The name brought with it a flood of memories that had nothing to do with the fire. Daniel's wife, his business partner's widow, the woman he'd avoided for 5 years out of shame and guilt, and the simple inability to face another person who'd lost someone they loved. The nurse left, and Ethan stared at the ceiling tiles, counting them, because counting was easier than thinking. He'd saved them. Somehow, impossibly, he'd run into a burning building and brought out 2 people alive. It should have felt like victory, like redemption, like proof that he wasn't completely broken. But all he felt was tired, so bone-deep tired that even breathing seemed like too much work. He must have drifted off again because when he opened his eyes, the room was brighter and there was someone sitting in the chair beside his bed. For a disoriented moment, Ethan thought it was Sarah, that the last 5 years had been the nightmare and this was him waking up. But then his vision cleared and he saw it was Clara Grant, her head wrapped in white bandages, her arm in a sling, dark circles under her eyes that spoke of a sleepless night spent in a different kind of hell. "Hi," she said softly when she saw he was awake. Her voice was rough, damaged by smoke, but recognizable. "Don't try to talk. The nurse said you shouldn't strain your lungs." Ethan stared at her, this woman he'd known once upon a lifetime. This woman whose husband had been his best friend. This woman he'd walked past every night for months without having the courage to knock on her door. Clara seemed to understand that he had questions he couldn't ask. "Amelia's in the pediatric ward. They're keeping her for observation, but she's going to be fine. She keeps asking about you, keeps saying, 'The sad man from the window came to save us.' Took me a while to understand what she meant." Clara's eyes were bright with unshed tears. "How long, Ethan? How long have you been walking past our house?" He couldn't answer, couldn't explain that he'd been haunting their street like a ghost, unable to leave the scene of all his failures. But Clara didn't seem to need an explanation. "I recognized you immediately, you know. Even covered in soot and ash, even after 5 years, I'd know you anywhere." She wiped at her eyes with her free hand. "I tried to find you. After Daniel died, after you donated everything and disappeared, I hired investigators, called every number I could find, drove to your old apartment only to find it abandoned. You were just gone, like you'd never existed at all." The words hit Ethan like physical blows. He hadn't considered that anyone would look for him, that his disappearance would register as anything other than the inevitable collapse of a broken man. "I was angry at you," Clara continued, her voice cracking. "So angry. You left me alone to run the firm, to deal with Daniel's death, to explain to our daughter why Uncle Ethan didn't come around anymore. I thought you didn't care, that losing your family had made you selfish, that you'd forgotten everyone else was hurting too." She took a shaky breath. "But then last night, you ran into a burning building to save us. You could have died. You almost did die. And I realized I never knew anything about why you left." A knock on the door interrupted them. A man in his 50s with salt and pepper hair and a detective's tired eyes stepped into the room. He introduced himself as Detective Raymond Harris, Chicago PD, and he had questions about the fire. Clara stood up. "He can't talk yet. His lungs—" "I know, Mrs. Grant. I've already spoken with your doctors." Harris pulled out a notebook. "Mr. Miles, I need you to understand something. That fire at your house, it wasn't an accident. The fire investigators found accelerant in multiple locations. Someone set that fire deliberately. Someone meant to kill you and your daughter." The words hung in the air like smoke. Claire's face went white. "What? That's impossible. Why would anyone—" "That's what we're trying to figure out." Harris turned to Ethan. "Mr. Miles, I need to ask you some questions. You can write answers if you can't speak. First, did you see anyone else in or around the house last night? Anyone at all?" Ethan shook his head, then gestured for a pen and paper. The nurse brought him a notepad, and with shaking hands he wrote, "Door to bedroom was locked from outside. Couldn't get in. Had to break it down." Harris read the note, and his expression darkened. "Locked from the outside. Mrs. Grant, do you remember that? Someone locking you in?" Clara sank back into the chair, her hand pressed to her mouth. I don't know. I was putting Amelia to bed. We were reading a story. Then I smelled smoke. I tried to open the door, but it wouldn't budge. I thought it was stuck, that the house was settling or something. Then the smoke got worse and I couldn't think straight. And I hit my head trying to get the window open. She trailed off, horror dawning in her eyes. Someone locked us in. Someone wanted us to die. Do you have any enemies, Mrs. Grant? Anyone who might want to hurt you or your daughter? Business rivals? Disgruntled employees? Ex-partners? No, yes, of course there are competitors in the tech world, but nothing that would lead to murder. This is insane. This is... Clara stopped, her eyes going distant. Richard? Richard? Harris leaned forward. Who's Richard? Richard Hale. He was Daniel's business partner before Ethan. They started an investment firm together back in the 90s. It ended badly. There was some kind of financial dispute. I never knew all the details. Daniel bought him out, and Richard made some threats, but that was over a decade ago. He couldn't... Ethan's hand shot out, grabbing the notepad. He wrote furiously, "Richard Hale, check him. Daniel never trusted him. Said he was cutting corners, doing something illegal, was going to report him." Harris read the note carefully. "Did Daniel report him?" Clara shook her head. "I don't know. Daniel didn't talk much about business at home. He said he wanted to keep work and family separate." Her voice dropped to a whisper. "Do you think Richard had something to do with this? With trying to kill us?" "I think Richard Hale just became a person of interest in an attempted murder investigation," Harris said grimly. He turned to Ethan. "Mr. Miles, I'm going to need a full statement from you when you're able to speak. In the meantime, I'm posting an officer outside both your rooms. If someone tried once, they might try again." After Harris left, Clara and Ethan sat in silence, the weight of revelation pressing down on them. Finally, Clara spoke, her voice barely audible. "Ethan, I need to tell you something about the money you donated, the $3 million from your share of the firm." She met his eyes. "I used it to start a memorial foundation in Daniel's name. We fund architecture scholarships for underprivileged kids, support homeless shelters, provide housing for families who've lost everything. Last year alone, we helped 60 families rebuild their lives." Ethan felt something twist in his chest. He'd given away that money because it had felt like blood money, like profit earned from a partnership that had died along with Daniel. He'd never imagined it would do any good. He'd barely imagined anything beyond getting through each day without completely falling apart. "I wanted to thank you," Clara continued. "I wanted to tell you what your gift meant, how many lives it changed. But you were gone. So I thanked you in my prayers instead, and I hoped that wherever you were, whatever darkness you were living in, you'd somehow know that something good came from your pain." Ethan reached for the notepad again, his hand shaking with more than just physical trauma. He wrote, "I'm sorry for leaving, for not being there, for everything." Clara read it, and fresh tears spilled down her cheeks. "You have nothing to apologize for. You lost everything, Ethan. Your wife, your children, your whole world. No one gets to judge how you survived that." She reached out and took his hand, careful of the IV line. "But you're not alone anymore. You saved my daughter's life. You saved my life. That means something. That means we're connected now, whether you like it or not." The door burst open and a small tornado in a hospital gown flew into the room. Amelia, trailed by a frantic nurse, made a beeline for Ethan's bed. Clara caught her daughter before she could leap onto the injured man. "Amelia Rose Grant, you're supposed to be in your room." "But, Mommy, I had to see him. I had to make sure he was okay." Amelia wriggled free from her mother's grasp and stood beside Ethan's bed, her dark eyes solemn and much too old for 6. "You're the sad man from the window." Ethan nodded slowly. Up close, Amelia looked startlingly like Daniel, the same sharp intelligence in her eyes, the same determined set to her jaw. But there was something else too, something that was purely her own, a kind of luminous certainty, as if she saw deeper into the world than most people and wasn't afraid of what she found there. "I watched you every night," Amelia said matter-of-factly. "You walked by our house and you always looked so sad. I asked Mommy why you were sad, but she didn't know who you were. I wanted to wave to you, but you never looked up at my window, only at the light." Clara's eyes widened. "Amelia, why didn't you tell me someone was walking past the house every night?" "Because he wasn't scary. He was just sad. And sad people need to be watched over in case they need help." Amelia turned back to Ethan. "But last night, when the fire came, I knew you would help us. Even when Mommy was crying and the door wouldn't open and everything was full of smoke, I knew you would come. Because that's what happens in stories. The sad knight saves the princess, and then he's not sad anymore." The simplicity of it nearly broke Ethan. This child, this impossibly perceptive child, had seen him every night and somehow understood that he needed to be needed, that he was drowning in his own grief and guilt and needed a reason to keep swimming. He picked up the notepad and wrote, "Thank you for watching over me." Amelia read it and smiled, a smile so bright it seemed to light up the dim hospital room. "You're welcome. Now you can watch over us too. Mommy says we're going to live in a hotel for a while because our house burned down. But that's okay. Hotels have room service." "Amelia," Clara said gently, "Mr. Miles needs to rest. Come on, let's get you back to your room before the nurses call security on us. Can I come visit him again?" "We'll see, baby." "That means yes in mommy language," Amelia stage whispered to Ethan, then allowed herself to be led away, though she looked back 3 times before disappearing through the door. Clara paused in the doorway. "She's right, you know, about the night not being sad anymore. I don't know what the fire took from you 5 years ago, Ethan, but last night you got something back. I could see it in your eyes when you carried Amelia out. You remembered what it felt like to save someone." She smiled sadly. "Don't run away again, please. Let us help you the way you helped us." Then she was gone, and Ethan was alone with his thoughts and his pain and the impossible weight of knowing that his life had just become infinitely more complicated. Over the next 3 days, the investigation into the fire consumed the hospital floor. Detective Harris came and went, each time with more questions and more disturbing information. The fire had indeed been arson, set by someone with knowledge of Clara's security system. The smart home network that controlled everything from the locks to the fire alarms had been hacked, disabled before the fire started. Whoever did this had wanted to make sure Clara and Amelia couldn't escape, couldn't call for help, couldn't survive. Richard Hale's name kept coming up. The man had a history of financial fraud, had been investigated twice by the SEC but never charged. After Daniel bought him out, Hale had disappeared into the shadows of Chicago's business world, emerging occasionally to make failed investments and burn bridges. He'd declared bankruptcy 3 years ago, lost his house, his wife, everything. "A man with nothing to lose is a dangerous man," Harris said during one visit. "We're looking for him, but he's gone underground. We've got people watching your hotel, Mrs. Grant, and you too, Mr. Miles, when they discharge you." Ethan's voice had started to come back, though it was rough and painful to use. "He killed them," he rasped. "My family, 5 years ago." The room went silent. Harris leaned forward. "What?" "My house fire. Wasn't an accident either. Had to be. Same pattern. Couldn't get out. Couldn't get to them." The words were costing him, each syllable like swallowing broken glass, but he had to say them. Hale. It was Hale. Daniel must have found something, was going to expose him, so Hale killed his way out. Clara, who'd been sitting in her usual chair, stood up abruptly. "Oh my God, Ethan, are you saying Richard killed Daniel too?" "Heart attack," Ethan whispered. "Stress. But who caused the stress? Who was threatening him?" "Hale." Harris was already on his phone, barking orders to reopen the investigation into Ethan's family's deaths, to pull records on Daniel Grant's death, to find every connection between Richard Hale and the 2 fires. The hospital room transformed into a command center, detectives and fire investigators filling the space, asking questions, taking notes, building a case against a man who'd spent 5 years thinking he'd gotten away with murder. Through it all, Amelia kept visiting, her presence a bright spot in the darkness of revelation and grief. She'd draw pictures of Ethan fighting dragons, of houses that didn't burn down, of families that stayed together. She'd tell him stories about her day, about the hotel's breakfast buffet, about the therapy dog that visited the pediatric ward. She'd hold his hand with her small bandaged fingers and tell him that it was okay to be sad, that sad wasn't forever, that mornings always came even after the darkest nights. On the fourth day, a woman Ethan didn't recognize arrived with Detective Harris. She was in her late 30s, thin to the point of gauntness, with hollow eyes and the desperate look of someone who'd been running from something for too long. Her name was Jennifer Martinez, and she had a story to tell. "I set the fire," she said without preamble, her voice shaking. "At the Grant Mansion. I'm the one who did it." Clara gasped. Ethan tried to sit up, his body protesting. Harris held up a hand indicating they should let her talk. "A man hired me, gave me $20,000 and told me exactly how to do it. How to hack the security system, where to pour the accelerant, how to lock the bedroom door from the outside." Jennifer was crying now, tears streaming down her face. "He said the house would be empty. He said it was an insurance job, that the owner wanted the payout. He said no one would get hurt." "But you knew someone was inside," Clara said, her voice hard as steel. "You had to know." "I didn't. I swear I didn't. I did exactly what he told me, showed up at 11, disabled the system, set the fires. I was gone by 11:30. There weren't supposed to be anyone home. Mrs. Grant, you were supposed to be at a charity gala that night. You always go to the Hospital Foundation gala on the third Friday. He knew your schedule." Clara's face went pale. "I was supposed to go. But Amelia got sick that afternoon. Nothing serious, just a cold, but I stayed home. I never posted about it on social media, never told anyone but my assistant." "Then he didn't know," Jennifer said desperately. "He didn't know you'd be there, and when I found out from the news that people were inside, that a child was inside, I couldn't live with it. I couldn't sleep, couldn't eat. My daughter—" Her voice broke. "My daughter has leukemia. The treatment costs hundreds of thousands of dollars. Our insurance won't cover it all." I was desperate. When the man offered me money, I didn't ask questions. I should have asked questions. "Who hired you?" Harris demanded. "Give me a name." "Richard Hale. He said he had a grudge against the owner, that this was about revenge and money. He showed me pictures of an empty house, blueprints of the security system. He made it seem so simple, so clean. No victims, no one hurt, just a building burning." Ethan's voice cut through the room, quiet but lethal. "My family. Did he hire you for that too?" Jennifer's head snapped toward him. "What?" "No, I never. 5 years ago I was in California. I didn't even know Richard Hale then." "But he did it," Ethan pressed. "Same method. My house fire. He killed my wife. My children." Jennifer crumpled, her sobs shaking her entire body. "I don't know. Maybe. He said he'd done this before, that he knew how to make it look like an accident. Oh God, what have I done?" A detective led Jennifer away to be formally processed and charged. Despite her cooperation, despite her remorse, she'd still committed arson and attempted murder. Her daughter's illness might buy her some leniency, but she'd crossed lines that couldn't be uncrossed. After she was gone, Clara turned to Ethan. "If Amelia hadn't gotten sick, if I'd gone to that gala, like I always do, we'd have come home to a pile of ashes. Or worse, if we'd come home while the fire was still burning." She couldn't finish the thought. "But you didn't," Ethan said, his damaged voice rough with emotion. "You were home. I was walking by. Amelia was watching. All the pieces fell exactly wrong and exactly right at the same time." "Divine intervention," Clara murmured. "That's what my mother would call it." "Or fate," Ethan countered. "Or chaos. Or just blind luck. Does it matter what we call it? You saved us. That's what matters." But Ethan was thinking about Jennifer Martinez and her sick daughter, about desperation making monsters out of ordinary people, about how easy it was to justify the unjustifiable when someone you loved was dying. He was thinking about Richard Hale, still out there somewhere, still dangerous, still capable of destroying more lives. "He's going to try again," Ethan said. "Hale. He wanted you dead for a reason, and that reason hasn't changed. He's going to try again." "Let him try," Clara said, and there was steel in her voice that Ethan remembered from Daniel's stories about his formidable wife. "This time we're ready. This time we're not alone. This time, he's not going to win. Detective Harris returned with news. They'd found Richard Hale's last known location, an apartment in Gary, Indiana, just across the state line. They were moving in tonight, coordinating with Indiana State Police, building a case that would put Hale away forever. But Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that it wouldn't be that simple, that men like Hale didn't go down without a fight, that the danger wasn't over just because they'd identified it. That night, unable to sleep despite the pain medication, Ethan stared out his hospital window at Chicago's glittering skyline. 5 years ago, he'd helped design parts of that skyline. 5 years ago, he'd been a man with a future. Then the fire came and took everything, and he'd spent half a decade convinced that his life was over, that he was just marking time until death finally remembered to collect him. But then another fire came, and this time he'd run toward it instead of being paralyzed by it. This time he'd save the people inside instead of watching helplessly while they burned. And now Clara and Amelia were in his life, and there were connections forming that he couldn't name but could feel, threads binding him back to the world of the living, to purpose, to something that felt dangerously close to hope. A soft knock interrupted his thoughts. Clara stood in the doorway, wrapped in a borrowed robe, her bandages gleaming white in the dim light. "Can't sleep either?" she asked. "Hurts too much to sleep." "Yeah, me too." She came in and sat in the chair that had become hers over the past few days. Harris called. They raided Hale's apartment. He wasn't there. They found evidence, though, files on both of us, surveillance photos of my house, records of the payment to Jennifer, everything they need to convict him. They just need to find him first. He's already gone, probably left the country. Maybe. Or maybe he's still here, still planning, still thinking he can finish what he started. Clara looked at Ethan. "I'm scared. Not for me, but for Amelia. She's so young, and she's already lost so much. Daniel dying, now our home burning down, learning that someone wants to kill her. How do you protect a child from that kind of evil?" Ethan thought about Emma and Jacob, about all the ways he'd failed to protect them, about how the world could end in an instant and love wasn't enough to stop it. But he also thought about Amelia's face when he'd carried her out of the fire, about her certainty that he would come, about the way she still smiled despite everything. "You can't protect her from all of it," he said finally. "The world's too big and too cruel, but you can teach her to be strong, to be brave, to believe in people even when people disappoint her. You can give her a life worth living, worth fighting for. That's all any parent can do." "Is that what Sarah would have wanted? For your children?" The name hit him like a punch, but for the first time in 5 years, it didn't destroy him. Sarah wanted them to be happy, to be kind, to make the world better just by being in it. He paused. "I think they would have been, if they'd lived." "Tell me about them," Clara said softly. "Please." "I never got to really know them. Just saw them at company parties, the occasional family dinner, but I'd like to know." So Ethan talked, haltingly at first, his damaged voice barely managing the words, but then more easily as the memories came. He told her about Emma's obsession with architecture, how she'd spend hours drawing elaborate buildings with gardens on every floor, about Jacob's collection of interesting rocks, about how he'd been convinced that one of them was a dinosaur egg and had kept it under his pillow to keep it warm, about Sarah's laugh, about how she sang off-key while cooking, about how she believed in the fundamental goodness of humanity even when presented with evidence to the contrary. He talked until his voice gave out completely, until the pain medication finally dragged him towards sleep. And Clara listened to every word, bearing witness to the family that had been lost, making sure their stories didn't die with them. As Ethan's eyes finally closed, he heard Clara whisper, "They were lucky to have you, and you were lucky to have them. That luck doesn't go away just because they're gone." But Ethan, drifting into drug-softened dreams, wasn't sure he believed in luck anymore. He believed in fire, and pain, and loss. He believed in children who watched from windows and mothers who fought to protect them. He believed that sometimes the world gave you a second chance to save someone, even if you couldn't save everyone. And somewhere in the darkness of Chicago, Richard Hale was still out there, still planning, still believing that he could control the narrative of other people's lives. But what Hale didn't know was that the people he'd tried to destroy were stronger than he'd calculated, more connected than he'd anticipated, and angrier than he could imagine. The fire had forged them into something new, something dangerous, something that wouldn't stop until justice was served and the man who'd stolen so much from so many was finally made to answer for his crimes. Outside the hospital window, snow began to fall, covering Chicago in a blanket of white that made everything look clean and new, that promised fresh starts and second chances, that whispered the oldest lie, that tomorrow might be better than yesterday. And for the first time in 5 years, Ethan Miles let himself believe in that lie, just a little, just enough to keep breathing through the night. The discharge papers came on a gray January morning, 2 weeks after the fire had changed everything. Ethan signed them with hands that still trembled, his fingers wrapped in gauze where the burns were still healing. The doctor gave him strict instructions about wound care, physical therapy for his ankle, breathing exercises for his damaged lungs, and a prescription for pain medication that Ethan had no intention of filling. He'd lived with pain before. He knew how to survive it without the chemical fog that made everything feel distant and unreal. Clara was waiting in the lobby with Amelia, who'd been discharged 3 days earlier. The little girl ran to him the moment she saw him, stopping just short of collision when she remembered he was still hurt. "You're coming home with us," she announced, as if it had already been decided by forces beyond adult control. Ethan looked at Clara, who had the grace to look slightly embarrassed. "I meant to ask you properly. We're staying at the Four Seasons until I can figure out housing. There's a suite with an extra bedroom. It's not much, but it's better than wherever you've been living." "I have an apartment," Ethan said, though even as he said it he realized how little he wanted to go back there. Back to the studio that smelled like carnitas and loneliness, back to the narrow bed where he'd spent 5 years not sleeping, back to the emptiness that had been his only companion for so long. "I'm sure you do. Come stay with us anyway." Clara's voice was gentle but firm. "Just for a few weeks, until you're back on your feet. You saved our lives, Ethan. Let us return the favor." So Ethan found himself in the back of Clara's Mercedes, Amelia chattering beside him about the hotel's swimming pool and the room service menu and the view of the lake from their window. Clara drove carefully through the January slush, her movements still slightly stiff from her injuries but determined. She'd gone back to the remains of her house once, had walked through the charred skeleton of what had been her home, and had emerged with a cardboard box of things that had somehow survived. Photo albums and a fireproof safe, some of Amelia's stuffed animals that had been in the garage, Daniel's watch that he'd left in his car the day he died. The hotel suite was nothing like Ethan's apartment. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked Michigan Avenue and the frozen expanse of Lake Michigan beyond. The furniture was elegant without being cold, expensive but comfortable. There were fresh flowers on the table and a basket of fruit that looked like it belonged in a still life painting. The extra bedroom Clara showed him was larger than his entire studio, with a king-sized bed and an attached bathroom with a shower that probably cost more than he made in 6 months. "I can't afford this," Ethan said, though he knew that wasn't what Clara meant. "You're not paying for it. I am. Or technically, Daniel's life insurance is. He had policies worth almost $2 million. I used some of it to start the foundation, invested the rest. I can afford to put you up in a hotel for a few weeks." She paused at the door. "Get some rest. We'll talk later about what happens next." What happens next? As if there was a roadmap for this, for the aftermath of trauma and rescue and revelation. As if any of them knew what came after you learned that someone had tried to murder you, that the same someone had probably murdered your best friend and your rescuer's family, that evil wasn't an abstract concept, but a real person with a name and a history and the ability to destroy lives with calculated precision. Ethan unpacked the plastic bag the hospital had given him containing his few possessions, his wallet, his keys, his phone that had been in his coat pocket during the fire and was now cracked and water damaged but somehow still functional. He sat on the edge of the bed that was too soft, too clean, too much like something a person with a real life would own, and he tried to figure out who he was supposed to be now. For 5 years, he'd been Ethan Miles, the ghost, the janitor, the man who walked alone through cold streets and felt nothing except the dull ache of loss. His identity had been simple, uncomplicated by relationships or responsibilities or hope. He'd been a man waiting to die, marking time until the universe corrected its mistake and took him along with his family. But now Clara and Amelia were in his life, and Detective Harris was calling him twice a day with updates on the manhunt for Richard Hale, and his body hurt in ways that reminded him he was still alive, still capable of feeling, still existing in a world that continued to spin whether he wanted it to or not. He couldn't be the ghost anymore. That role had been burned away in the fire, and he wasn't sure what was left underneath. A knock on his door interrupted his spiral. Amelia stood in the hallway, holding a piece of paper. "I drew you a picture," she said, coming in without waiting for an invitation. She climbed onto the bed beside him and spread out her drawing. It showed 3 stick figures standing in front of a building that wasn't on fire. 1 tall figure, 1 medium figure, 1 small figure. A family that survived. "That's you," Amelia said, pointing to the tall figure. "And that's Mommy, and that's me. And that's our new house that we're going to build. Mommy says we can design it ourselves, anything we want. I want a tower room like a princess. What do you want?" Ethan looked at this child who'd somehow adopted him, who'd decided he was part of her story now. "I don't know what I want." "That's okay. You can think about it. We have time." Amelia leaned against his arm, careful of his burns. "Mr. Ethan? Are you still sad?" The question was so direct, so innocent, so impossible to answer with anything but the truth. "Yes, but maybe a little less sad than before." "Good. Sad is okay sometimes. Mommy says Daddy's death made her sad for a long time, and she still gets sad about it sometimes. But she also gets happy about other things. You can be both at the same time." Out of the mouths of children, Ethan thought. This 6-year-old understood something about grief that had taken him 5 years to even begin to grasp. That sorrow and joy weren't mutually exclusive, that you could miss the dead while still living with the living, that the human heart was vast enough to hold contradictions. "You're very smart," he told her. "I know. Mommy says I get it from Daddy. He was really smart too. He built buildings like you used to." "Did your mom tell you about that?" "Some. She told me you and Daddy were best friends, that you made beautiful buildings together, that something really sad happened to you, and that's why you stopped making buildings and started walking by our house every night." So Clara had told her. Not everything, probably. 6 was too young to understand the full weight of what had been lost, what had been taken, what had been endured. But enough. Enough for Amelia to know that Ethan's sadness had a source, a reason, a history. "I'm sorry about your family," Amelia said with the solemn sincerity that only children could manage. "Mommy says they would be proud of you for saving us." Ethan's throat closed. He managed a nod, not trusting his voice. "You should come have dinner with us. Mommy ordered room service. There's enough for everyone." So Ethan found himself sitting at the suite's dining table, eating pasta that cost $40 a plate and drinking water from crystal glasses, while Clara talked about her plans and Amelia provided commentary on everything from the quality of the breadsticks to the pattern on the napkins. It was surreal and uncomfortable, and the most normal thing Ethan had done in 5 years. After dinner, while Amelia was in her room doing homework that the hotel had arranged to have sent over from her school, Clara poured herself a glass of wine and offered one to Ethan. He declined. He'd learned early in his grief that alcohol only made the darkness darker, the memories more vivid, the mornings more unbearable. "Detective Harris called while you were resting," Clara said, settling into one of the plush armchairs. "They've tracked Hale to a property in Wisconsin, a hunting cabin owned by one of his old business associates. They're planning a raid tomorrow morning." "Will they get him?" "Harris seems to think so. Apparently Hale's been using burner phones, but he made a mistake, called his ex-wife to try to access a bank account. They traced the call." Clara took a sip of wine. It's almost over. The nightmare is almost over. But Ethan had lived through too many nightmares to believe they ended cleanly. And if they don't get him? If he runs again? Then we keep looking. We don't stop until he's caught, until he answers for what he did to your family, to my family, to everyone he's hurt. The determination in her voice was absolute. This wasn't the Clara Grant that Ethan remembered from 5 years ago. The quiet woman who'd stood beside Daniel at company events and smiled politely while the architects talked shop. This was someone forged in fire and loss, someone who'd learned that the world didn't protect you just because you played by the rules, someone who'd decided to fight back. "Tell me about Daniel," Ethan said. "About what happened after I left." Clara was quiet for a long moment, staring into her wine glass like it held answers. He was devastated when your family died. We all were, but Daniel, he took it personally, like he should have been able to prevent it somehow. And then when you disappeared, when you wouldn't return his calls or answer the door, he felt like he'd failed you too. Guilt twisted in Ethan's stomach. He'd known he was hurting Daniel by cutting him off, but he'd been drowning and hadn't been able to care about anyone else's pain. He tried everything to find you, Clara continued. Hired investigators, called your relatives, drove to every place he thought you might go. Nothing worked. You just vanished. Eventually, he had to accept that you didn't want to be found. That hurt him more than I think he admitted. I didn't mean to hurt him. I know. You were in survival mode. You did what you had to do to keep breathing. Clara met his eyes. But it cost him. The stress of running the firm alone, of trying to keep your clients, of dealing with all the projects you'd left half finished. He worked 18-hour days, stopped sleeping, stopped taking care of himself, and then one morning, he collapsed in his office. Massive coronary, dead before the ambulance arrived. He was 41 years old. The words landed like punches. Ethan had known Daniel died of a heart attack, but he'd never let himself think about the specifics, about the how and why and when. He'd been too buried in his own grief to examine anyone else's. I killed him, Ethan said flatly. My breakdown killed your husband. No. Claire's voice was sharp. Richard Hale killed him. The stress didn't come from you leaving. It came from what Daniel found out right before he died. He'd been going through the firm's old files, trying to understand some financial discrepancies. That's when he discovered what Hale had done. Ethan leaned forward. What did he find? Insurance fraud, mostly. When Hale was still part of the firm, he'd been falsifying safety reports, cutting corners on materials, bribing inspectors. There were at least 6 buildings that should have been condemned but weren't because Hale paid off the right people. Daniel found evidence of all of it. He was planning to go to the authorities to make it right, even if it destroyed the firm's reputation. And Hale found out. That's what Detective Harris thinks, that Daniel confronted Hale, or Hale somehow learned that Daniel knew. The timing lines up. Daniel died 3 days after he told me he'd discovered something terrible, something that was going to change everything. He wouldn't tell me the details. Said he needed to be sure before he made accusations. And then he died. The heart attack, Ethan said slowly, his mind working through the implications. Could it have been induced, caused by something other than stress? Clara stared at him. Aunt, are you saying Hale murdered him? Actually murdered him? Not just stressed him to death? I'm saying a man who's willing to burn down houses with people inside, who's willing to hire someone to commit arson and murder, who spent years covering his tracks. I'm saying that man is capable of anything. And if Daniel was about to expose him, about to destroy him, Hale would have found a way to stop him. The implications hung in the air between them, heavy with horror. If Richard Hale had murdered Daniel, then Clara had spent 5 years believing her husband died of natural causes, when really he'd been killed by someone he'd once called a friend. If Hale had murdered Daniel, then everything, Ethan's family's deaths, the attempt on Clara and Amelia's lives, all of it, was connected by one thread of greed and evil, and the willingness to destroy anyone who stood in his way. We need to tell Harris, Clara said, already reaching for her phone. The conversation with the detective lasted over an hour, Clara recounting everything she remembered about Daniel's final days, about his behavior, about the files he'd been reviewing. Harris promised to look into it, to have Daniel's body exhumed if necessary for a new autopsy, to follow every lead no matter how cold the trail had gone. After she hung up, Clara looked exhausted, the adrenaline that had been keeping her upright finally depleting. 5 years, she whispered. I've spent 5 years thinking it was just bad luck, just stress and genetics and his family history of heart disease. But if Hale killed him, if someone deliberately took him from me, from Amelia, then we make sure he pays for all of it, Ethan finished. Every death, every fire, every life he destroyed. We make sure the world knows what he did. They sat in silence as night fell over Chicago, as the city lights came on like stars, as somewhere in Wisconsin police officers prepared to raid a hunting cabin and hopefully end a manhunt that had consumed the last 2 weeks. Ethan felt something shifting inside him, something that had been frozen solid for 5 years beginning to thaw. It wasn't forgiveness. He couldn't forgive himself for falling asleep that night, for not waking up in time, for failing to save the people he loved most. But it was understanding that the fire that killed his family hadn't been his fault, that it had been set deliberately, maliciously, by a man who valued money over lives, who saw people as obstacles to be removed rather than human beings with families and futures and the fundamental right to exist. The knowledge should have made it worse, should have added rage to the grief, should have given him a new target for all the self-destruction he'd been aiming inward for so long. But instead, strangely, it made it lighter. Because if the fire had been set, if it had been murder rather than accident, then there was nothing Ethan could have done differently. He couldn't have prevented what he didn't know was coming. His vigilance wouldn't have mattered. His wakefulness wouldn't have helped. He'd been set up to fail, and his family had paid the price for someone else's sins. "You're thinking loud," Clara said, breaking the silence. "I'm thinking that I've spent 5 years hating myself for something that wasn't my fault. I'm thinking that's a lot of wasted time and wasted pain." Ethan looked at her. "I'm thinking I don't know how to stop hating myself just because the truth changed." "You don't have to figure it out tonight, or tomorrow, or next week. Healing doesn't have a schedule." Clara stood up, moving to the window that overlooked the lake. "When Daniel died, everyone kept telling me I'd get through it, that time heals all wounds, that I'd be okay eventually. They meant well, but it felt like they were minimizing it, like losing the love of my life was something I could just get over if I waited long enough." "Did you? Get over it?" "No, I learned to live with it. I learned that grief doesn't disappear, it just becomes part of you, like a scar that aches when it rains. Most days I'm fine. I run my company, I take care of Amelia, I build the life Daniel would have wanted for us. But some days I wake up and the first thought I have is that I need to tell Daniel something, and then I remember I can't, and the grief is just as fresh as the day he died." Ethan understood that more than she knew. "I still set the table for 4 sometimes, just muscle memory. And then I have to put away the extra plates and remember all over again that they're gone." They stood together at the window, 2 people bound by loss and fire, and the slow, painful work of surviving when everything you loved had been taken. Outside, Chicago glittered with the lives of 8 million people, most of them just trying to get through another day, most of them carrying their own griefs and traumas and impossible weights. The city was beautiful from this height, the ugliness and pain smoothed away by distance and darkness, transformed into something almost hopeful. The next morning, Detective Harris called with news. The raid had been successful. Richard Hale was in custody, arrested without incident at the Wisconsin cabin where he'd been hiding for the past 2 weeks. He'd tried to run, had actually made it to his car before tactical officers stopped him, but he was caught. Finally, impossibly, caught. "He's not talking," Harris said over the phone, which Clara had put on speaker so Ethan could hear. Lawyered up immediately. "But we don't need his confession. We've got Jennifer Martinez's testimony, the evidence from his apartment, the financial records showing he paid her. We've got enough to put him away for a long time." "What about Daniel?" Clara asked. "And Ethan's family?" "We're looking into it, going to exhume Daniel's body, run a full toxicology panel, and we're reopening the investigation into the Miles family fire. It'll take time, but if Hale was responsible, we'll prove it." After Harris hung up, Clara turned to Ethan with tears in her eyes. "They got him. It's over. He can't hurt anyone else." But Ethan knew it wasn't quite over. The arrest was just the beginning. There would be trials, testimony, years of legal proceedings before Hale faced real consequences for what he'd done. And even then, even if he was convicted and sent to prison for life, it wouldn't bring back the dead. It wouldn't undo the fires or the pain or the 5 years of grief that Ethan had endured. Justice wasn't the same as restoration. Punishment wasn't the same as healing. Still, it was something. It was a start. Over the following days, a strange new routine developed. Clara went back to work, running her tech company from the hotel suite through video calls and remote meetings. Amelia attended school via a tablet while they figured out what to do about permanent housing. And Ethan, for the first time in 5 years, had nothing to do. He'd quit his janitorial job the day after the fire, hadn't even called in, had just stopped showing up. He probably should have felt guilty about that, but he couldn't seem to care about a job that had never been anything more than a way to mark time between one meaningless day and the next. Instead, He spent his days healing. Physical therapy for his ankle, exercises for his lungs, salve for his burns. Clara had arranged for a therapist to come to the hotel twice a week, a kind woman named Dr. Patel who specialized in trauma and grief. Ethan had resisted at first, had spent the first 3 sessions sitting in stubborn silence, but eventually something in Dr. Patel's patient presence had broken through his defenses. "You're angry," she'd observed during their 4th session. "Of course I'm angry. My family was murdered." "Not at Richard Hale. At yourself." The accuracy of it had stunned him into honesty. "I should have woken up. I should have smelled the smoke. I should have gotten them out." And if the fire was set with accelerant in multiple locations, if it was designed to spread too quickly for escape, if the doors were locked and the windows barred. I don't know that's what happened. But you know it's possible. You know that what happened to Clara and Amelia might have happened to your family. And if it did, if they were murdered by someone who planned it carefully, who made escape impossible, then you couldn't have saved them no matter what you did. The words had circled in Ethan's head for days afterward. Couldn't have saved them. 5 years he'd believed the opposite. That if he'd just been better, more alert, more careful, they'd still be alive. But if Dr. Patel was right, if the fire had been set the same way, then his family had been doomed from the moment Hale made his decision. Nothing Ethan did or didn't do would have mattered. It should have been comforting. It wasn't. Because if he couldn't have saved them, then what good had he been? What was the point of being a husband and father if you couldn't protect the people who depended on you? The point, Dr. Patel had said when he voiced this, is that you loved them, that you gave them joy while they were alive, that they knew they were treasured. You can't protect anyone from everything, Ethan. None of us can. All we can do is love people while we have them and grieve them when they're gone. Meanwhile, the case against Richard Hale was building. The toxicology report from Daniel's exhumed body came back showing traces of a rare heart medication that Daniel had never been prescribed. In high doses, it could induce cardiac arrest in someone with an underlying heart condition. The medical examiner revised Daniel's cause of death from natural to suspicious. Murder charges were added to Hale's growing list of crimes. The investigation into the Miles family fire confirmed Ethan's worst fears. Accelerant had been used, the same type that Jennifer Martinez had used at Clara's house. The fire had started in 3 locations simultaneously, making escape nearly impossible. And the windows in the bedrooms where Sarah and the children had been sleeping showed signs of having been tampered with, making them unable to open. It had been murder, calculated and cold, designed to look like an accident. "I'm sorry," Detective Harris had said when he delivered the news in person, wanting Ethan to hear it from him rather than read it in a report. "I know this doesn't make it easier, might even make it harder, knowing they were targeted. But Harris was wrong. It did make it easier, in a terrible way. Because now Ethan knew. After 5 years of questions and guilt and wondering what he could have done differently, he finally had the answer. Nothing. There was nothing he could have done. His family had been murdered by a man who saw them as collateral damage in a scheme to cover up fraud and corruption. Their deaths had nothing to do with Ethan falling asleep or failing to wake up. They were simply in the way of someone evil, and that someone had removed them. The knowledge was excruciating and liberating in equal measure. Excruciating because it meant his wife and children had died for no good reason, for nothing except money and secrets and one man's refusal to face consequences. Liberating because it meant the burden of responsibility that Ethan had carried for 5 years could finally be set down. He hadn't killed them through negligence or carelessness or inadequacy. They'd been taken from him by someone else's choice, someone else's malice, someone else's evil. "What are you thinking?" Clara asked one evening. They'd fallen into the habit of talking after Amelia went to bed, sharing a space that was companionable rather than romantic, the intimacy of survivors rather than lovers. "I'm thinking that I've spent 5 years as a ghost, and I don't know how to be alive again." You start small. You get up in the morning. You eat breakfast. You talk to people. You let yourself feel things other than grief. Like what? Like gratitude, like purpose, like hope, even if it's just a little. Clara poured herself the single glass of wine she allowed herself each night. "I want to show you something. Will you come somewhere with me tomorrow?" The next morning, they left Amelia with a babysitter the hotel had vetted and approved, and Clara drove them north along Lakeshore Drive. She wouldn't tell Ethan where they were going, just that it was important, that she'd been planning this for a while but was waiting for the right moment. They ended up in Lincoln Park, at a site Ethan didn't recognize at first. It had been fenced off, cleared of debris, prepared for construction. A sign announced it as the future home of the Phoenix Center, groundbreaking scheduled for spring. "Daniel designed this," Clara said, leading Ethan through the gate past the security guard who recognized her. It was his last project, a community center for families in crisis, shelter space, counseling services, job training, childcare, everything a family needs to rebuild after losing everything. She handed Ethan a rolled-up blueprint. He spread it out across the hood of her car, his architect's eye immediately recognizing Daniel's style. The generous use of natural light, the open spaces designed to feel welcoming rather than institutional, the attention to detail that made every element both beautiful and functional. "It's brilliant," Ethan said, his voice rough with emotion. "It's exactly the kind of thing Daniel always wanted to build." He was waiting for funding. The city approved it, but the money wasn't there, so I'm funding it. The Memorial Foundation, the insurance money, everything. We're building it exactly as Daniel designed it, and we're naming it after him. Clara looked at the empty lot, seeing something Ethan couldn't yet. "But I need help. The firm Daniel left me is successful, but I'm not an architect. I don't have the vision he had. I need someone who understands what he was trying to create." Understanding hit Ethan like a physical force. "You want me to oversee the construction? I want you to do more than that. I want you to co-design it with me. Use Daniel's blueprints as a foundation, but make it better, make it yours too. Add the things you've learned about loss and survival and what people really need when their lives fall apart." She turned to him. "I want you to come back, Ethan. Come back to architecture. Come back to the firm. Help me build something that honors Daniel and your family and everyone else Hale destroyed." The offer was staggering. 5 years ago, Ethan had walked away from architecture believing he'd never design again, that his ability to create had died with his family. But standing here, looking at Daniel's plans, feeling the wind off the lake, and seeing the space where something new could rise, he felt something he'd thought was gone forever. He felt the possibility of purpose. "I don't know if I can," he said honestly. "I don't know if I remember how to be that person." "Then learn again, the same way you're learning to be alive again. One day at a time, one decision at a time, one line on a blueprint at a time." Clara put her hand on his arm. "You don't have to answer now. Think about it. But know that the offer stands. The firm is still Grant and Miles' design. Your name never came down. Daniel wouldn't let me remove it, said you'd come back someday. I think he knew before I did that you would." They stood in silence, looking at the empty lot that would soon be filled with concrete and steel and glass, with rooms where broken families could find shelter and hope and the tools to rebuild their shattered lives. The Phoenix Center, rising from the ashes of tragedy, proof that destruction wasn't the end of the story. When they got back to the hotel, Amelia was waiting with a new drawing. This one showed a building, not a house, but something larger, with lots of windows and people standing in front of it. In the sky above, she had drawn stars. And if you looked closely, some of the stars had faces. "Those are the people who died," Amelia explained, seeing Ethan study her drawing. "Daddy and your family. They're watching from heaven to make sure we build something good." Out of the mouths of children, Ethan thought again. This 6-year-old understood something profound about memory and legacy, about how the dead lived on through the actions of those who loved them, about how grief could be transformed into something constructive rather than destructive. That night, Ethan stood at his window overlooking Lake Michigan and thought about second chances, about how the world sometimes gave you opportunities to try again, to do better, to take the broken pieces of your life and build something new from the rubble. Claire's offer was more than a job. It was a chance to honor Daniel's memory by completing his work, a chance to honor Sarah and Emma and Jacob by creating something that would help other families survive what they hadn't, a chance to prove that Richard Hale's evil hadn't won, that the fires he'd set had forged survivors rather than just creating victims. Ethan pulled out his phone and made a call he'd been avoiding for 2 weeks. His mother answered on the third ring, her voice shocked to hear from the son who'd gone silent 5 years ago. "Mom," Ethan said, his voice breaking. "Mom, I need to tell you something. About the fire. About why Sarah and the kids died. I need to tell you, and then I need to tell you I'm sorry. For disappearing, for not letting you help, for everything." The conversation lasted 2 hours, ending with his mother crying and telling him she loved him, that she'd never stopped loving him, that she'd been praying for 5 years that he'd come back to them. She was in Florida now, had moved there with Ethan's stepfather 3 years ago. But she wanted to come visit, wanted to meet Clara and Amelia, wanted to see her son alive again after thinking she'd lost him along with her grandchildren. After he hung up, Ethan felt lighter. The weight hadn't disappeared, grief didn't work that way, but it had shifted, redistributed, become something he could carry without it crushing him. He looked at his reflection in the dark window and saw not a ghost, but a man. Damaged, scarred, still hurting, but alive. Still capable of building, of creating, of mattering. The next morning, he found Clara in the suite's living room, working on her laptop while Amelia did her online schoolwork at the dining table. "I'll do it," Ethan said without preamble. "The Phoenix Center, the firm, all of it. I'll come back." Clara looked up, her face transforming with a smile that reminded Ethan of Daniel, of the friend he'd lost, of the partnership that had once meant everything. "Yeah? Yeah. But I need to do it right. I need to go back to school, refresh my certifications, relearn everything I've forgotten, and I need therapy, regular therapy, not just twice a week, but as often as Dr. Patel thinks I need it. I can't do this halfway. If I'm coming back, I'm doing it properly." "Whatever you need. The foundation can cover your education, your therapy, everything. This isn't charity, Ethan. This is an investment in something Daniel believed in someone he believed in." Amelia abandoned her schoolwork and ran over, throwing her arms around Ethan's waist. "You're staying! You're really staying!" And Ethan, who hadn't been hugged by a child in 5 years, who'd thought he'd never feel that particular joy again, wrapped his arms around this little girl who'd watched him from her window and believed he was worth saving. "I'm staying," he confirmed, and realized he meant it. Not just staying in Chicago or staying at the hotel, but staying alive, staying present, staying in the world instead of drifting through it like smoke. The path forward wouldn't be easy. There would be dark days and setbacks and moments when the grief threatened to pull him back under. There would be the trial of Richard Hale to endure, testimony to give, trauma to relive in front of judges and juries, and the man who'd destroyed so much. There would be the hard work of rebuilding a career and a life and a sense of self that had been burned away 5 years ago. But for the first time since the night his family died, Ethan Miles had something more powerful than grief. He had purpose. He had people who needed him and work that mattered, and a future that extended beyond the next painful day. He had Clara's determination and Amelia's faith and Daniel's blueprints waiting to be transformed into something real and lasting and good. The fire had tried to destroy him, had destroyed so much, but it had also forged connections stronger than steel, had revealed truths that needed revealing, had brought together 3 people who might otherwise have never known each other. Clara had been right when she said that grief became part of you, a scar that ached but also marked you as someone who'd survived, who'd endured, who'd refused to let the worst thing that happened to them be the only thing that defined them. Outside, Chicago went about its business. Millions of people living their lives, carrying their burdens, building their dreams. And somewhere in a jail cell, Richard Hale was beginning to understand that his schemes had finally caught up with him, that the fires he'd set had illuminated his crimes rather than concealing them. That justice might be slow, but it was coming for him with the inevitability of dawn after the longest night. Spring came to Chicago with the kind of tentative warmth that promised better days ahead, melting the last stubborn patches of snow and coaxing green from the trees in Lincoln Park. Ethan stood at the construction site of the Phoenix Center, Daniel's original blueprint spread across a makeshift table, his own modifications sketched in the margins. 3 months had passed since he'd agreed to come back to architecture. 3 months of relearning software and codes and regulations. 3 months of therapy sessions that left him exhausted but clearer. 3 months of living in the hotel suite with Clara and Amelia and slowly understanding what it meant to be part of a family again. The construction crew had broken ground 2 weeks ago, And now the foundation was being poured, concrete trucks rumbling in and out while workers shouted instructions over the noise of machinery. Ethan watched it all with something that felt dangerously close to pride. He'd designed buildings before, but never one that mattered quite like this. Never one that would house people who'd lost everything, who needed not just shelter, but hope, who needed to believe that their stories weren't over just because tragedy had rewritten the chapters they'd planned. "You're doing that thing again," Clara said, coming up beside him with 2 cups of coffee from the food truck parked at the corner. "That thing where you look at the site like you're trying to memorize every detail. Daniel used to say you couldn't design a building you hadn't first built in your head, that you had to see it complete before you could make it real." Ethan accepted the coffee gratefully. "I'm trying to see it the way he did. The families coming through those doors, the kids playing in that courtyard, the counseling sessions happening in those rooms. If I can see it clearly enough, maybe I can build it right." "You're already building it right." The city inspector said your modifications to Daniel's design are brilliant. Something about load distribution and natural light optimization that went completely over my head. Clara smiled. "You're back, Ethan, really back. Not just going through the motions, but actually living in it." He wanted to argue, to point out all the ways he was still broken, still struggling, still waking up some mornings convinced that the last 3 months had been a dream, and he was still in his studio apartment in Pilsen pushing a mop across other people's floors. But the evidence was hard to deny. He was standing at a construction site he was managing. He was drinking coffee with a friend. He was making decisions about the future instead of just surviving the present. The trial of Richard Hale was set to begin in 2 weeks, and the prosecution had been building their case with methodical precision. They had Jennifer Martinez's testimony, the forensic evidence from both fires, the financial records showing Hale's fraud, the toxicology report from Daniel's exhumation, and a paper trail of corruption that stretched back 15 years. Assistant District Attorney Monica Chen had warned them it would be difficult. Hale had hired an expensive defense team that was already filing motions and trying to suppress evidence, but she was confident they had enough to convict. "Have you decided if you're going to testify?" Clara asked, reading his mind the way she'd gotten disturbingly good at doing over the past 3 months. "Chen says I don't have to, that they have enough without me reliving it all in front of a jury. But I think I need to, for Sarah and Emma and Jacob. They don't have a voice anymore. I have to be their voice." Clara nodded, understanding in a way only someone who'd also lost everything could. "I'm testifying too. For Daniel. For Amelia. For what could have happened if you hadn't been walking past our house that night. The what-ifs haunted all of them. What if Ethan had taken a different route home that night? What if Clara had gone to the gala instead of staying home with Amelia? What if the fire department had arrived 5 minutes earlier or 5 minutes later? What if any of 1,000 variables had shifted slightly, changed the outcome, rewritten the ending of their stories? But Clara had taught Ethan something important about what-ifs. They were just another way of torturing yourself with alternate realities that didn't exist. The only reality that mattered was the one they were living in, the one where they'd all survived and were building something from the ashes. A black sedan pulled up to the construction site, and Detective Harris emerged looking grim. Ethan's stomach tightened. Harris only showed up in person when the news was too important or too terrible for a phone call. "We have a problem," Harris said without preamble. "Jennifer Martinez is dead." The words hung in the spring air like ice. Clara's coffee cup slipped from her hand, splashing across the dirt. Ethan felt his chest constrict, his healing lungs suddenly struggling to process oxygen. "What happened?" he managed. "Apparent suicide. She hanged herself in her apartment last night. Her daughter found her this morning." Harris's face was carved from stone. "The timing is suspicious as hell. 2 weeks before trial, our star witness dies. Hale's defense is going to have a field day with this." "It wasn't suicide," Clara said flatly. "You know it wasn't suicide." "I know it looks bad. I know the timing couldn't be worse. But the scene checks out. No signs of forced entry, no evidence of struggle. She left a note saying she couldn't live with what she'd done, that her daughter deserved a better mother than a murderer." Harris pulled out his notebook. The note was in her handwriting, authenticated by our analysts. And her daughter said she'd been depressed since she was arrested, that she'd stopped eating, stopped sleeping, was convinced she was going to prison, and her daughter would end up in foster care. Or someone got to her, Ethan said, his mind already working through the possibilities. Threatened her daughter, gave her an ultimatum. Kill yourself or we kill your kid. Someone desperate to keep her from testifying. Hale's been in jail the whole time. Maximum security, no contact with the outside world except his lawyers. We've monitored every call, every visit. There's no evidence he ordered a hit. Then someone connected to him. Someone who had as much to lose as he did if the truth came out. Ethan thought about the corruption Hale had orchestrated, the bribes and payoffs, and network of people who'd looked the other way while he cut corners and falsified reports. Harris, you said there were at least 6 buildings that should have been condemned. Buildings Hale built with substandard materials and bribed inspectors to approve. Who were those inspectors? Where are they now? Harris's expression shifted, recognition dawning. You think one of them silenced Martinez to protect themselves? I think Hale didn't operate alone. I think he had accomplices, people who took his money and covered his tracks. And if this all comes out at trial, if Hale starts naming names to save himself, those people are going to prison too. Ethan felt the anger building, hot and righteous. Jennifer Martinez was desperate and guilty and terrified. She would have been easy to manipulate, easy to convince that her daughter would be better off without her, that suicide was her only option. Someone did this, Harris. Someone murdered her and made it look like she did it to herself. I'll look into it. Re-interview everyone connected to Hale's business dealings. But Ethan, even if you're right, even if someone pushed Martinez over the edge, proving it is going to be nearly impossible. And without her testimony, our case just got a lot weaker. After Harris left, Clara and Ethan stood in silence, watching the construction crew work, the normalcy of their tasks a jarring contrast to the bomb that had just been dropped into their laps. Jennifer Martinez was dead. The woman who'd set the fire that nearly killed Clara and Amelia, the woman who'd been racked with guilt and ready to testify against the man who'd hired her, was gone. We're going to lose, Clara said quietly. Hale's going to walk free. No. Ethan's voice was hard. We're not giving up. Martinez's testimony would have helped, but Chen said they have enough without it. The physical evidence, the financial records, the connection to my family's fire. They can still convict him. You don't sound convinced. Because he wasn't. Ethan had seen enough of the justice system over the past 3 months to know that cases weren't won or lost on evidence alone. They were won on stories, on the narrative the prosecution could build, on whether they could make 12 strangers care enough about the victims to vote guilty. Jennifer Martinez had been the human face of Hale's corruption, the living proof that he hired people to commit murder. Without her, the prosecution's story had a hole in it, and Hale's expensive lawyers would drive a truck through that hole. That evening, back at the hotel suite, Amelia sensed the tension and demanded to know what was wrong. Clara tried to deflect, to protect her daughter from the adult horrors of murder and manipulation, but Amelia was too perceptive to be fooled. Someone else died, didn't they? She asked, her dark eyes serious. Someone connected to the bad man who tried to hurt us. Clara looked at Ethan, silently asking permission. He nodded. Amelia deserved honesty, even when honesty was terrible. The woman who set our house on fire died last night, Clara said carefully. She was going to help us make sure the man who hired her went to prison. Now she can't. Did he kill her too? We don't know. Maybe. Maybe she was just so sad about what she'd done that she couldn't keep living. Sometimes sadness can be that strong. Amelia absorbed this, her expression thoughtful in a way that no 6-year-old should have to be. Like Mr. Ethan was, before he saved us. He was so sad he didn't want to keep living either. The accuracy of it stole Ethan's breath. He'd never explicitly told Amelia about the depth of his depression, about the nights he'd considered just not waking up, about how close he'd come to giving up entirely. But somehow this impossibly intuitive child had understood anyway, had seen in him what others had missed. I was very sad, Ethan confirmed, kneeling down so he was at Amelia's eye level. So sad I couldn't see any reason to keep going. But you know what saved me? You did. Needing to help you gave me a reason to keep fighting. Knowing you needed me made me want to live again. Then we saved each other, Amelia said simply. You pulled me out of the fire, and I pulled you out of the sadness. That makes us family, right? Because families save each other. Clara was crying now, silent tears streaming down her face. Ethan felt his own eyes burning, his throat tight with emotion. This child, who'd lost her father and her home and her sense of safety, still had enough love and wisdom to see the connections that bound them together, to understand that family wasn't just blood, but choice and circumstance and the willingness to keep showing up for each other. "Yes," Ethan said, "that makes us family." The next 2 weeks passed in a blur of preparation and anxiety. Monica Chen, the prosecutor, met with them multiple times, preparing them for testimony, warning them about the tactics Hale's defense would use, drilling them on staying calm and credible under cross-examination. Chen was in her 40s, sharp and relentless, the kind of lawyer who didn't lose cases she believed in, but even she admitted that Jennifer Martinez's death had complicated things. The defense is going to argue that without Martinez's testimony, we can't prove Hale hired her, that the evidence in his apartment could have been planted, that the money trail is circumstantial, that we're trying to convict him based on suspicion rather than proof. Chen spread her files across the conference table in her office. They're going to paint him as a victim, someone with a history of mental illness and paranoia who became obsessed with Daniel Grant and blamed him for his financial failures. They'll say the stuff in his apartment is the collection of a disturbed man, not a criminal. "What about my family's fire?" Ethan asked. "What about the accelerant and the tampered windows?" They'll argue there's no direct evidence linking Hale to that fire, that the similarities to the Grant fire are coincidental, that you're a grieving widower looking for someone to blame and you fixated on Hale because he had business disputes with your partner. Chen met Ethan's eyes. "I'm not saying I believe any of this. I'm saying this is what they're going to argue, and we need to be ready." Clara leaned forward. "What about Daniel's death? The toxicology report showing he was poisoned?" "Strong evidence, but not conclusive. The medication found in his system could theoretically have been ingested accidentally. The defense will argue that Daniel was stressed, possibly self-medicating, possibly given the wrong medication by mistake. Without proof that Hale administered the drug, it's hard to get a conviction on that charge." Chen flipped through her notes. "Our strongest case is the attempted murder of you and Amelia. We have the forensic evidence, the financial records, Hale's motive. If we can get convictions on that, we can potentially retry him later on the other charges if we develop new evidence." It wasn't enough. It would never be enough. But it was what they had. The trial began on a humid Monday in May, the courtroom packed with journalists and spectators, and the families of everyone Hale had destroyed. Ethan sat in the gallery with Clara, both of them dressed formally, both of them trying to project a confidence they didn't entirely feel. Amelia had been left with Clara's mother, who'd flown in from Seattle to help. The child didn't need to see this, didn't need to hear the details of how someone had tried to kill her. Richard Hale entered the courtroom flanked by his defense team, and Ethan got his first clear look at the man who'd destroyed his life. Hale was 62, gray-haired and distinguished-looking, the kind of man who'd be cast as a trustworthy banker in a movie. He wore an expensive suit and an expression of wounded dignity, playing the part of the falsely accused with practiced ease. When his eyes swept the gallery and landed on Ethan, there was no recognition, no guilt, no acknowledgement that they'd ever existed in each other's orbits. Just a blank indifference that was somehow more chilling than hatred would have been. The prosecution's opening statement was strong. Chen laid out the evidence methodically, building a timeline of corruption and murder that stretched back 15 years. She described Hale as a man who valued money over lives, who covered his crimes with additional crimes, who saw people as obstacles to be eliminated. She painted Daniel as a hero who discovered the truth and paid for it with his life. She described Ethan as a survivor seeking justice for a family stolen from him. And she presented Clara and Amelia as the latest victims of Hale's greed, saved only by the courage of a man who'd already lost everything. The defense's opening was a masterclass in misdirection. Hale's lead attorney, a silver-haired woman named Patricia Drummond, expressed sympathy for the victims while systematically dismantling the prosecution's narrative. She described Hale as a troubled man, someone who'd struggled with mental health issues following his bankruptcy, someone who'd been scapegoated by a legal system looking for easy answers. She suggested that Jennifer Martinez had acted alone, that her suicide note confirmed her guilt, that there was no proof Hale had hired her or even known her. She painted Daniel's death as tragic but natural, Ethan's family's fire as a separate tragedy with no connection to her client, and the Grant fire as a crime committed by a desperate woman that Hale had nothing to do with. By the end of the first day, Ethan felt sick. Drummond was good, too good, and the jury was listening. Two of them were even taking notes during her opening statement, underlining whatever point she was making that resonated. "Don't panic," Chen told them during a break. "Opening statements are just previews. The evidence is what matters, and we've got the evidence." But as the trial progressed through its second and third days, as forensic experts testified about accelerants and fire patterns, as financial analysts explained money trails and shell corporations, as police officers described the evidence found in Hale's apartment, Ethan watched the defense systematically chip away at every piece of the prosecution's case. The accelerant evidence could have been planted. The financial records showed payments but not what they were for. The evidence in Hale's apartment could have been gathered by a mentally ill man obsessed with the Grants rather than proof of criminal intent. On the fourth day, Clara took the stand. She wore a navy suit and spoke clearly, describing the night of the fire, waking to smoke, finding the door locked, trying desperately to protect Amelia while the house burned around them. She described hearing Ethan break down the door, the relief and terror of being carried through flames, the moment she realized someone had tried to kill them. "Mrs. Grant," Drummond said during cross-examination, her voice gentle and sympathetic, "you've been through a terrible trauma. No one disputes that. But isn't it possible you were confused? That in the chaos and fear, you misremembered certain details?" "I didn't misremember the door being locked from the outside," Clara said firmly. "But you hit your head. You had a concussion. Your own medical records show you were disoriented and confused when you arrived at the hospital." "I was disoriented from smoke inhalation and a head wound. I wasn't confused about someone locking me and my daughter in a burning room." Drummond smiled sadly, like she was dealing with a difficult child. "Mrs. Grant, is it possible the smart home system simply malfunctioned? That what seemed like someone locking you in was actually a technological glitch during a house fire?" The fire investigators said many things, but they can't prove who disabled your security system, can they? They can't prove it was my client rather than Ms. Martinez acting alone, or even a random hacker who saw an opportunity. The cross-examination lasted 2 hours, Drummond picking at every detail of Clara's testimony, suggesting alternative explanations for everything, planting seeds of doubt. By the time Clara stepped down, she looked exhausted and defeated. "You did great," Ethan told her outside the courtroom. "You told the truth. That's all you can do. The truth isn't enough, not when they have lawyers who can twist it into something else." On the fifth day, Ethan testified. He described his family, his life before the fire, the night they died. He explained his 5-year descent into grief and guilt, his nightly walks past the Grant mansion, the moment he saw smoke and ran toward it instead of away. He described carrying Amelia through flames, about knowing he might die but not caring as long as he got her out. He talked about learning the fire was arson, about the investigation into his family's deaths, about finally understanding that he couldn't have saved them because they'd been murdered. Monica Chen led him through it all carefully, building the emotional weight of his story, making the jury see him not as a witness, but as a human being who'd suffered unimaginably and survived. Then Drummond stood up for cross-examination, and Ethan braced himself. "Mr. Miles, you've testified that you believe my client is responsible for your family's deaths, but you have no proof of that, do you?" The evidence shows your family died in a fire. Tragic, yes, but the fire at your home occurred 5 years ago, long before Ms. Martinez claims she was hired by my client. So unless you're suggesting Mr. Hale has been setting fires for years, there's no connection. The method was the same. Accelerant in multiple locations, windows tampered with, designed to kill. Designed, you say, as if fires have intent, as if they're not random, chaotic forces of nature. Drummond's voice was sharp now. "Mr. Miles, isn't it true that you were clinically depressed following your family's deaths?" "I was grieving." "You were more than grieving. You isolated yourself, quit your job, abandoned your friends and family. You've testified about walking past the Grant mansion every night. Some might call that stalking. Ethan felt his anger rising. I wasn't stalking. I was walking home from work. Through one of the wealthiest neighborhoods in Chicago? When you lived in Pilsen? That's quite a detour, isn't it? Drummond pulled out a map. According to this, the direct route from your workplace to your apartment is 3.2 miles. The route through the Gold Coast past the Grant Mansion is 4.7 miles. You were walking an extra mile and a half every night. Why? Because... Ethan faltered. How did he explain it? That he'd needed to walk past the house where his former business partner had lived, that seeing the lit windows had been his only connection to his old life, that it had kept him tethered to the world just barely enough to not let go entirely? Because you were obsessed with Daniel Grant's family, Drummond suggested. Because you blamed them for something. Maybe for your business partner not saving you after your tragedy. Maybe for living when your family had died. Maybe for reasons only you understand. That's not true, isn't it? You were outside their house the night of the fire. Isn't it possible you saw an opportunity? A chance to play hero? To insert yourself into their lives? To make them dependent on you? The courtroom erupted. Monica Chen was on her feet objecting. The judge was gaveling for order. Clara was shouting something Ethan couldn't hear over the roaring in his ears. Drummond had just accused him of setting the fire, of being the villain instead of the hero, of orchestrating the whole thing. Your Honor, the defense has no evidence to support these outrageous accusations, Chen was saying. Withdrawn, Drummond said smoothly. No further questions. The damage was done. Ethan could see it in the jurors' faces, the doubt that hadn't been there before. Even if they didn't believe he'd set the fire, even if they thought Drummond's suggestion was ridiculous, she'd accomplished her goal. She'd made him look unstable, obsessive, potentially dangerous. She'd transformed his nightly walks from evidence of grief to evidence of something darker. That evening, back at the hotel, Ethan was ready to give up. They're going to acquit him. Drummond destroyed my credibility. The jury thinks I'm crazy. You're not crazy, Clara said fiercely. You're a man who lost everything and survived. That's not weakness. That's strength. It doesn't matter what it actually is. It matters what the jury thinks it is. Then we change what they think. Clara was pacing now, her mind working. Chen still has rebuttal witnesses. She can call character witnesses for you, people who knew you before, who can testify about who you really are. Who? Everyone from my old life is gone. I burned those bridges, Clara. There's no one left. There's me. There's Amelia. There's your mother. There's Daniel's colleagues who remember you. Clara stopped pacing and looked at Ethan. And there's the Phoenix Center, the construction photos, the blueprints, the proof that you came back from the edge and started building something good. That's the story we need to tell. Not that you're a broken man who stalked our family, but that you're a survivor who found purpose in helping others. The next day, Monica Chen called Clara back to the stand. This time, she asked different questions. Mrs. Grant, Mr. Miles has been living with you and your daughter for the past 4 months. Is that correct? Yes. In that time, has he ever acted inappropriately? Ever made you feel unsafe or uncomfortable? Never. He's been nothing but kind and respectful. He's been like family. And your daughter, Amelia, how does she feel about Mr. Miles? She adores him. She calls him Uncle Ethan. She draws him pictures, asks him to help with her homework, tells him about her day. She trusts him completely, and my daughter is an excellent judge of character. Chen presented photos of Ethan at the Phoenix Center construction site, working alongside contractors, reviewing blueprints, clearly engaged and professional. She called 2 of Daniel's former colleagues who testified about Ethan's brilliance as an architect, his integrity, his devotion to his family before they died. She called Dr. Patel, who testified about Ethan's progress in therapy, about how he was actively working through his trauma in healthy ways. And finally, she called Ethan's mother, who flew in from Florida and sat in the witness box with tears streaming down her face as she described her son before the fire, the devastation afterward, and the miracle of having him back in her life. My son is a good man, she said. The best man I know. What happened to his family broke him, but it didn't destroy him. He saved 2 lives that night, risked his own life without hesitation. That's who Ethan is. That's who he's always been. The prosecution rested. The defense called their own experts, their own witnesses, people who testified about Hale's character and Jennifer Martinez's history of financial desperation. But they couldn't erase what Chen had established, that Ethan Miles was a hero, not a villain, and that Richard Hale had the motive, opportunity, and means to have orchestrated everything. The jury deliberated for 3 days. 3 days during which Ethan, Clara, and Amelia stayed in the hotel suite, barely eating, barely sleeping, waiting for 12 strangers to decide whether justice existed or whether evil could buy its way out of consequences. On the afternoon of the 3rd day, word came. The jury had reached a verdict. The courtroom was silent as the jury foreman stood up, as the judge asked if they'd reached a unanimous decision, as the foreman confirmed they had. Ethan gripped Clara's hand so tightly he was probably hurting her, but she didn't pull away. On the charge of attempted murder of Clara Grant, how do you find? We find the defendant guilty. The courtroom exhaled as one, but there were more charges. On the charge of attempted murder of Amelia Grant, how do you find? Guilty. On the charge of arson in the 1st degree? Guilty. On the charge of murder in the 1st degree of Daniel Grant? Guilty. Clara was sobbing now, her whole body shaking. Ethan felt tears on his own face, hot and liberating. On the charge of murder in the 2nd degree of Sarah Miles, Emma Miles, and Jacob Miles, the pause seemed to last forever. Guilty on all counts. Richard Hale, who'd sat expressionless through the entire verdict, finally reacted. His face crumpled, aged 10 years in an instant, as the weight of what he'd done and what would happen to him crashed down. He was 62 years old. With the sentences these convictions would carry, he'd die in prison. He'd never be free again. Outside the courthouse, surrounded by reporters and cameras, Monica Chen made a statement about justice being served, about the victims finally getting closure. But Ethan wasn't listening. He was holding Clara as she cried tears of relief and grief and exhaustion. He was thinking about Sarah and Emma and Jacob, about Daniel, about Jennifer Martinez's daughter who'd lost her mother but would be cared for by the foundation Clara was already planning to support her. "It's over," Clara whispered. "It's finally over." But Ethan knew it wasn't over. Not really. The trial was over, the verdict was in, Hale would be sentenced and sent away. But the work of healing, of building new lives from the ruins of old ones, of transforming grief into purpose, that work was just beginning. The Phoenix Center still needed to be completed. Amelia still needed to grow up knowing she was safe and loved. Clara needed to keep running her company and her foundation. And Ethan needed to keep showing up, keep designing, keep choosing life over the comfortable numbness of merely existing. That night, the 3 of them sat in the hotel suite with the lights of Chicago glittering below them. Amelia had fallen asleep on the couch between Ethan and Clara, her head on his shoulder, her hand holding her mother's. They'd ordered pizza and actually ate it, the first real meal any of them had managed in days. "What happens now?" Clara asked quietly, not wanting to wake her daughter. "Now we build," Ethan said. "We finish the Phoenix Center. We help people who've lost everything find a way forward. We prove that Hale didn't win, that his fires created survivors instead of just victims. And us? What are we?" Ethan looked at this woman who'd become his friend, his business partner, his family. He looked at the child sleeping against him, the child who'd watched him from her window and somehow known he was worth saving. He thought about Daniel, about the business partner and friend who'd believed in him, even after he'd disappeared, who'd kept his name on the firm because he knew Ethan would come back someday. "We're people who refuse to let the worst thing that happened to us be the last thing that defined us," Ethan said. "We're people who chose hope over despair, action over paralysis, life over the slow death of giving up. We're not perfect. We're still healing, still figuring it out, still carrying scars that will probably never fully fade. But we're here. We're alive. We're building something good from the ashes, and that's enough. That's more than enough." Clara smiled through fresh tears. "Daniel would be proud of you, of both of us. Sarah, too. And Emma and Jacob." Ethan felt the familiar ache of missing them, but it was softer now, less crushing. They'd want us to keep living, to keep building, to make sure their deaths meant something. The Phoenix Center is their legacy as much as Daniel's. Every family that finds help there, every life that gets rebuilt, that's proof that love doesn't die just because people do, that the good we do outlasts us. Outside, Chicago glittered with possibility, with the lives of millions of people all carrying their own griefs and hopes and impossible burdens. Somewhere in that city, there were families who'd lost everything and needed help. Soon, very soon, the Phoenix Center would open its doors to them. And Ethan Miles, the man who'd spent 5 years as a ghost, would be there to welcome them home, to show them that survival was possible, that healing was real, that the human spirit could endure even the hottest flames and emerge scarred but unbroken, damaged but still capable of extraordinary things. The fire had tried to destroy them all, but in the end, all it had done was forge them into something stronger than steel, more resilient than stone, more enduring than any building Ethan had ever designed. They were survivors. They were family. They were living proof that even in the darkest night, even in the hottest flames, hope could survive if you were brave enough to carry it. 6 months later, on a crisp November morning that smelled of possibility and new beginnings, Ethan stood in front of the completed Phoenix Center and felt something he hadn't experienced in 6 years. Pure, uncomplicated joy. The building rose 3 stories against the autumn sky, its facade a harmony of glass and warm brick that seemed to glow in the morning light. Daniel's original vision had been beautiful, but what Ethan had created, what they'd all created together, was something more. It was hope made tangible, grief transformed into shelter, loss reimagined as the foundation for helping others find their way home. The grand opening was scheduled for 10 o'clock, and already people were gathering. City officials and donors, families who'd be among the first residents, reporters documenting this moment when something good rose from the ashes of tragedy. But Ethan wasn't watching the crowd. He was looking at the bronze plaque being installed beside the main entrance, the one that read, "The Daniel Grant Phoenix Center, in memory of Daniel Grant, Sarah Miles, Emma Miles, and Jacob Miles. From the ashes, we rise." Clara came to stand beside him, beautiful in a burgundy dress, her hair pulled back to show the small scar on her temple where she'd hit her head the night of the fire. She'd stopped covering it with makeup months ago, had decided scars were nothing to hide. They were proof you'd survived something that tried to kill you. "It's perfect," she said softly. Daniel would have loved it. The way the light comes through those windows, the courtyard where kids can play safely, the common spaces designed to feel like home instead of an institution. You honored his vision and made it better. "We made it better," Ethan corrected. "None of this happens without you, without your foundation, your funding, your refusal to let grief be the end of the story." Amelia appeared between them, wearing a navy dress with white flowers and clutching a rolled-up piece of paper. She was 7 now, taller and more confident, but still carrying that same luminous certainty that had made her watch Ethan from her window and believe he'd come when she needed him. "Can I read my speech now, before everyone gets here? I want to practice on you first." "Of course, sweetheart." Clara knelt down to Amelia's level. "Go ahead." Amelia unrolled her paper and cleared her throat with exaggerated seriousness. "My name is Amelia Rose Grant, and my daddy died when I was 4 years old. I don't remember everything about him, but my mommy tells me stories. She says he wanted to build a place where people who lost everything could feel safe again. Then our house burned down and someone tried to hurt me and mommy. But Uncle Ethan saved us. He ran into the fire even though he was scared, even though he could have died, because that's what heroes do. They help people even when it's hard." She looked up from her paper. "Is that good so far?" "It's perfect," Ethan said, his voice rough with emotion. "Keep going." Uncle Ethan lost his family in a fire too, a long time ago. It made him so sad he couldn't see anything good anymore. But then he saved us and we saved him back because that's what families do. And now we built this place together for people who are sad like we were sad, who lost things like we lost things. My teacher says that making something good out of something bad is called resilience. I think it means you're stronger than the things that hurt you." Amelia folded her paper carefully. "The end. Except I'm also supposed to say thank you to everyone who donated money and helped build it and stuff. Mommy wrote that part for me because I don't know all their names." Clara pulled her daughter into a hug, holding on perhaps a moment longer than necessary. Ethan watched them and felt his heart expand with something that wasn't quite grief and wasn't quite joy, but some combination of both. The bittersweet awareness that life continued, that love persisted, that families formed and reformed and found each other in the wreckage. The crowd began to swell as 10 o'clock approached. Ethan recognized faces from the trial. Monica Chen looking proud and polished, Detective Harris in a suit that looked uncomfortable on his detective frame, even some of the jurors who'd convicted Richard Hale and had followed the Phoenix Center's construction through news reports. There were architecture colleagues Ethan hadn't seen in 6 years, people who remembered him from before and had reached out tentatively after the trial, testing whether he was ready to rejoin the world. His mother was there with his stepfather, both of them beaming with pride. And scattered throughout the crowd were the families who'd be moving into the Phoenix Center over the next few weeks. People who'd lost homes to fires or floods or foreclosures. People who needed not just shelter, but the kind of comprehensive support the center was designed to provide. Clara took the podium first, thanking the donors and city officials and construction crews who'd made this possible. She spoke about Daniel, about his vision of architecture as service, about his belief that buildings should heal rather than just house. Her voice was steady, but Ethan could see her hands trembling slightly as she gripped the podium, could see the effort it took to speak about her late husband in front of hundreds of people without breaking down. "My husband died believing he'd failed," Clara said, "believing that the corruption he'd discovered would destroy everything he'd built, that his legacy would be defined by what he couldn't prevent. But Daniel's real legacy is this building, these families, this proof that one person's vision can ripple outward long after they're gone. He's not here to see it completed, but I know he's watching, and I know he's proud." Then it was Ethan's turn. He approached the podium on legs that felt unsteady, his architect's mind cataloging every detail of the building behind him, the precision of the brickwork, the angles of the solar panels on the roof, the accessibility ramps that had been Daniel's particular passion. He'd spent 6 years not speaking, not engaging, not letting anyone see him. Now he was about to speak to hundreds of people about the worst and best moments of his life. "6 years ago, I was an architect who believed buildings could change lives," Ethan began. "Then I lost my wife Sarah, my daughter Emma, and my son Jacob in a house fire. I lost my family, my career, my faith in everything I'd believed about the world being fundamentally good and safe. I became a janitor who cleaned other people's buildings because I couldn't imagine creating anymore. I walked through my life like a ghost, just marking time until I could stop pretending to be alive." He saw his mother wipe her eyes, saw Clara watching him with encouragement and understanding, saw Amelia standing in the front row, her small face solemn and attentive. Then one December night, I walked past a house that was burning. Inside were Clara and Amelia Grant, trapped by a fire that was meant to kill them. I had a choice in that moment. I could keep walking, could let someone else be the hero, could stay safely in my grief and isolation, or I could run toward the fire instead of away from it. I could choose, just for one moment, to believe that saving someone else might save me too. The crowd was silent, hanging on every word. Ethan felt the weight of their attention, but also their empathy, their understanding that this story was about more than just one fire or one rescue. It was about everyone who'd ever lost something and had to decide whether to let that loss define them or transform them. We learned later that both fires, the one that killed my family and the one that nearly killed the Grants, were set by the same man. Richard Hale murdered my family to cover up his crimes. He tried to murder Clara and Amelia for the same reason. He stole years from all of us, caused pain that we're still working through. But what he didn't count on was that we'd survive, that we'd find each other, that we'd take our grief and our anger and our loss and build something that would help other people survive their own tragedies. Ethan gestured to the building behind him. The Phoenix Center isn't just a building. It's a promise. A promise that losing everything doesn't mean the story is over. A promise that communities can rebuild, that families can heal, that hope is stronger than despair if we're brave enough to reach for it. Daniel Grant designed this place to be a refuge. I tried to honor his design while adding what I've learned about what people really need when they've lost everything: light and space and dignity. The belief that their lives still matter, that their pain is seen, that they're not alone in the rebuilding. He looked directly at Amelia. A very wise 7-year-old once told me that making something good out of something bad is called resilience. She was right. This building is resilience. Every family that finds shelter here, every child who grows up in these walls feeling safe, every person who gets counseling or job training or childcare or just a community that sees them and values them, that's resilience. That's us refusing to let tragedy have the last word. The applause started before he'd finished, building like a wave. Ethan stepped back from the podium, overwhelmed, and felt Clara's hand slip into his. They stood together as Amelia came forward to read her speech, her small voice amplified by the microphone, but needing no amplification for the truth it carried. The crowd listened to this child describe loss and rescue and the way families could form from the most unlikely circumstances. And Ethan saw people crying, saw the recognition in their faces that this story was everyone's story, that we were all just trying to survive our own fires and find our way home. After the speeches, after the ribbon cutting and the tours and the endless photographs, after the caterers had served lunch and the families had been shown to their new apartments and the reporters had gotten their sound bites, Ethan found himself alone in the building's central courtyard. Daniel had designed this space as a green heart for the center, a place where residents could grow vegetables and flowers, where children could play under the supervision of parents who could watch from any window. Ethan had added a fountain, simple but elegant, with a bronze sculpture of a phoenix rising from flames. "It's everything you hoped it would be," a voice said behind him. Ethan turned to find Detective Harris, still looking uncomfortable in his suit. The detective had become something like a friend over the past months, checking in regularly, making sure Ethan and Clara knew about every development in Hale's case. The monster was in prison now, would die there, but Harris had made sure they knew about every appeal that was filed and denied, every attempt to overturn the verdict that failed. "I didn't let myself hope," Ethan admitted. Hoping felt dangerous, like tempting fate to take it away again. And now I'm learning that hope isn't about being certain things will work out. It's about choosing to believe they can, even when you have no guarantees. It's about building something anyway, loving people anyway, showing up for life anyway, even after you've learned how quickly it can all disappear. Harris nodded. "For what it's worth, I've been a detective for 23 years. I've seen a lot of tragedy, a lot of evil, a lot of people destroyed by circumstances beyond their control. But I've also seen people like you and Clara, people who take the worst thing that ever happened to them and somehow transform it into fuel for something good. You're not victims anymore. You're builders. That matters." After Harris left, Ethan sat on the edge of the fountain and watched the water cascade over the bronze phoenix. He thought about Sarah and Emma and Jacob, about whether they could see this somehow, whether the dead watched over the living or whether that was just a comforting story people told themselves. He decided it didn't matter. Whether they could see it or not, he was living in a way that honored them. He was creating beauty, helping people, choosing life over the slow death of depression and isolation. He was being the man Sarah had fallen in love with, the father Emma and Jacob had looked up to, the architect who believed buildings could heal. "Uncle Ethan?" Amelia had appeared beside the fountain, her dress slightly grass-stained from playing in the courtyard with some of the other children who'd be living at the center. "Mommy says we have to go soon, but I wanted to give you something first." She pulled out another drawing, this one carefully preserved in a plastic sleeve. It showed the Phoenix Center exactly as it looked now, surrounded by people and flowers and sunshine. In the sky above, she'd drawn 4 stars, each one with a face: Daniel, Sarah, Emma, and Jacob. "They're watching over us," Amelia said, "making sure we did it right. And I think they're happy. I think they're proud." Ethan took the drawing with hands that trembled. "Thank you, Amelia. This is the most beautiful thing anyone's ever given me." "You're welcome. Also, Mommy wanted me to ask you something, but she's being shy about it, which is weird because Mommy is never shy." Amelia's expression turned mischievous. "She wants to know if you want to move into the new house with us instead of staying at the hotel." Ethan's heart stuttered. "What new house?" "The one we're building or buying. I don't know the details because they think I'm too young to understand real estate, but basically, we're getting a real house again, and Mommy wants to know if you want to have your own room there. Like, officially live with us. As family." Clara had appeared at the courtyard entrance, looking mortified. "Amelia Rose Grant. I was going to ask him myself." You were taking too long and we have to leave soon. Amelia was unrepentant. Besides, Uncle Ethan was going to say yes anyway. Right, Uncle Ethan? Ethan looked at Clara, at this woman who'd become his partner in every way that mattered, who'd given him back his career and his purpose, and his ability to believe in tomorrow. They'd been dancing around this for months, this question of what they were to each other. Not romantic. That wasn't what either of them needed or wanted. Not yet, maybe not ever. But family, chosen and deliberate and real. Yes, Ethan said. Yes, I want to live with you, both of you, if you're sure. Clara's smile was radiant. I've never been more sure of anything. You're already family, Ethan. We're just making it official. They left the Phoenix Center as the sun began to set, painting the building in shades of gold and amber that made it look like it was glowing from within. Ethan took one last look at the structure he and Daniel had created together across time and death, at this monument to resilience and hope and the human capacity to build something good from the ashes of loss. The drive back to the hotel took them past 1847 North Dearborn Street, or what remained of it. The burned mansion had been torn down months ago, the lot cleared and sold to a developer who was building something new. Clara had been fine with it, had said she didn't need to keep the physical location where so much trauma had occurred. The memories she wanted to keep weren't tied to a place. They were tied to people, to love, to the family she and Daniel had built, and the new family she was building with Ethan and Amelia. But as they passed the empty lot, Ethan thought about that December night 6 years ago when everything had changed. If he'd taken a different route home from work that night, if he'd walked faster or slower by even a minute, if Amelia's window had been dark instead of lit, if any of 1,000 variables had shifted slightly, Clara and Amelia might have died and Ethan might have stayed lost in his grief forever. The what-ifs could paralyze you if you let them, could trap you in endless cycles of wondering about roads not taken and choices not made. But they could also fill you with gratitude. Gratitude that despite impossible odds, despite all the ways things could have gone wrong, somehow they'd all found each other. Somehow they'd survived. Somehow they'd taken their separate tragedies and woven them together into something that looked remarkably like hope. Over the following weeks, they settled into new rhythms. Clara found a house in Lincoln Park, close enough to the Phoenix Center that Ethan could walk to work, spacious enough that they each had privacy, but designed in a way that encouraged togetherness. Ethan moved his few possessions from the hotel's storage. It turned out 6 years of living as a ghost didn't accumulate much stuff, and found himself with a bedroom 3 times the size of his old studio apartment, with windows that overlooked a garden where Amelia had already planted flowers. The Phoenix Center officially opened its doors to residents in early December, almost exactly a year after the fire that had brought them all together. The first families moved in with a mixture of hope and hesitation, people who'd been burned before, sometimes literally, and were learning to trust that this time might be different, that this place might actually be what it promised. Ethan met them all, learned their stories, understood their fears. There was Marcus, a construction worker who'd lost his family's home to a gas explosion and was trying to rebuild his life while supporting his 2 teenagers. There was Sophia, a young mother who'd fled domestic violence with her 3 children and needed not just housing but counseling and job training and childcare so she could finish her nursing degree. There was the Chen family, immigrants who'd lost everything in an apartment fire set by a negligent landlord and were learning to navigate a system that hadn't been designed with them in mind. Each family had their own tragedy, their own version of the fire that had burned their life down. And Ethan found that talking to them helped him too, reminded him that survival wasn't about forgetting what you'd lost, but about choosing to build something new with what remained. He started leading a weekly group for people who'd experienced fire trauma, a space where they could talk about the nightmares and the hypervigilance and the way the smell of smoke could send you into a panic attack even years later. "Does it get easier?" Marcus asked during one session, his voice heavy with exhaustion. "This feeling like everything could burn down again at any moment?" Ethan thought about his answer carefully. Not easier exactly, but different. You learn to live with the fear instead of being controlled by it. You learn that surviving once means you can survive again if you have to. And you learn to appreciate what you have while you have it, because you know now that nothing is guaranteed. "That sounds exhausting," Sophia said. "It is. But it's also liberating in a strange way. When you stop expecting the world to be safe, you stop being angry at it for not being safe. You accept that terrible things happen, that we're all more fragile than we want to admit, and then you decide to live fully anyway, to love people anyway, to build and create and hope anyway, even though you know it could all disappear. Dr. Patel, who sat in on the sessions occasionally to provide professional guidance, nodded approvingly. That's called post-traumatic growth, when trauma doesn't just damage you but actually transforms you in ways that make you stronger, more empathetic, more aware of what really matters. I'd still rather have my house back, Marcus said. Rather have my kids not have to change schools, not have to explain to their friends why we're living in a shelter. Of course, Ethan agreed. This isn't about being grateful for the trauma. It's about acknowledging that since the trauma happened anyway, since we can't undo it, we have a choice in how we respond to it. We can let it destroy us, or we can let it forge us into something stronger than we were before. The sessions became some of the most important work Ethan did, more meaningful even than the architecture because they dealt with the human hearts that would inhabit the spaces he'd designed. He was still learning, still figuring out this new version of himself, still having bad days when the grief felt as fresh as the day his family died. But he was also having good days, days when he laughed at Amelia's jokes and helped Clara with the foundation's paperwork, and felt genuinely excited about a new design project. The bad days and good days coexisted, and he was learning that was okay, that healing wasn't linear, and wholeness didn't mean the absence of pain. Christmas came, and with it, a celebration at the Phoenix Center that filled the building with light and laughter. Families who'd had nothing decorated their apartments with dollar store ornaments and homemade decorations. Children who'd been living in cars or shelters or doubled up with relatives ran through the hallways with an energy born of finally having a safe place to be children. Clara's foundation provided gifts for everyone, but more importantly, it provided community. People who understood loss because they'd experienced it themselves, who could support each other without judgment or pity because they were all in the same boat. Ethan found himself standing in the central courtyard, now decorated with strings of lights that turned the fountain into something magical, and felt Sarah's presence more strongly than he had in years. Not as a ghost, not as pain, but as a warm memory of the woman who'd believed in beauty and goodness even when the world gave her reasons not to. She would have loved this, he thought, would have loved seeing families helped, children playing, community forming in a building designed with love and intention. "What are you thinking about?" Clara asked, joining him with 2 cups of hot chocolate from the party inside. "I'm thinking that 6 years ago, if someone had told me I'd be standing here like this, alive and engaged and part of a community, I would have thought they were insane. I couldn't see past the grief, couldn't imagine ever feeling anything else. And now? Now I still grieve every day, but I also feel other things, gratitude, purpose, hope, sometimes even joy. The grief doesn't go away, but it makes room for other emotions too." Ethan took a sip of hot chocolate. Sarah used to say that life was like a house with many rooms. You couldn't live in just one room forever. You had to walk through all of them. The room of sorrow, the room of joy, the room of work, the room of rest. She said the people who suffered most were the ones who got stuck in a single room and forgot there were doors. She sounds like she was wise. She was. She was the wisest person I ever knew. Ethan smiled, and it didn't hurt the way it used to. She'd be proud of Amelia. Your daughter has that same wisdom, that same ability to see through to the heart of things. She gets it from Daniel, too. He always said she was an old soul. Clara watched her daughter through the courtyard windows, playing with the other children without any of the self-consciousness some kids had at 7. I used to worry about her growing up without her father, about all the things she'd miss, all the moments he wouldn't be there for, and those worries haven't gone away. But I'm also grateful that she's growing up with you in her life. She has a male role model who's kind and patient and shows her that men can be vulnerable, can cry, can rebuild themselves after being broken. That's a gift, Ethan. You're giving her something invaluable. Ethan felt his throat tighten. I'm giving her what she gave me, a reason to keep going, a reminder that life continues and people need each other and love doesn't die just because people do. As winter gave way to spring, the Phoenix Center established itself as more than just temporary housing. It became a genuine community, a place where people supported each other through job searches and court dates and the million small crises that came with rebuilding a life. Marcus got a promotion at his construction company and was able to move his family into their own apartment, but he still came back twice a week to help with maintenance and talk to new residents about the job search process. Sophia finished her nursing degree and got a position at Northwestern Memorial, the same hospital where Ethan had recovered after the fire. The Chen family's oldest daughter was accepted to Northwestern University with a full scholarship, the first in her family to attend college. These were the success stories, the ones that made the local news and brought more donations to Clara's foundation. But there were also the harder stories, the families who struggled with addiction or mental illness or legal problems that couldn't be solved with just housing and good intentions. Ethan learned that rescue wasn't a one-time event, but an ongoing process. That saving someone didn't mean fixing them, but rather giving them the tools and support to fix themselves. "You can't save everyone," Dr. Patel reminded him when he got frustrated with a resident who kept missing counseling appointments and job interviews. "You can only create the conditions for people to save themselves. Some will take advantage of it and transform their lives. Others aren't ready yet, and that's not your failure. It's just where they are in their journey. But if we don't help them now, when will we? You are helping them by being here, by not giving up on them, by continuing to offer support even when they're not ready to accept it. Sometimes the most important thing we do is just show people that someone cares, that they matter, that they're worth the effort, even if they're not ready to believe it themselves yet." It was a hard lesson, learning to hold space for people without taking responsibility for their choices. But it was also a necessary one, because Ethan realized he'd been doing the same thing to himself for 6 years, taking responsibility for deaths he couldn't have prevented, blaming himself for not saving people who'd been murdered by someone else's deliberate choice. Learning to extend compassion to the residents who were struggling meant learning to extend compassion to himself too, to accept that he'd done the best he could with what he knew at the time, that grief had temporarily broken him but hadn't permanently destroyed him. On a warm evening in May, Clara called a family meeting. They'd been living together for 6 months now, had fallen into comfortable routines that felt natural and right. Amelia was thriving in her new school, had made friends, and joined the art club and come home every day with stories and drawings, and that particular exhaustion that came from learning and growing and being fully engaged with life. Clara's company had launched a new product that was getting national attention, and the foundation had expanded to 3 other cities, replicating the Phoenix Center model wherever there was need and funding. And Ethan had taken on 2 additional architecture projects, a community health clinic and a low-income housing development, that let him use his skills to serve people who needed good design but couldn't usually afford it. They were all healing. Not healed, Ethan had learned that healing wasn't a destination but a direction, but actively engaged in the process of becoming whole in new ways. "I've been thinking," Clara said as they sat around the dinner table after Amelia had gone to bed, "about what we are to each other, about how to name it, how to make it official." Ethan's heart rate picked up. They'd never talked about this explicitly, had just been living day by day and letting the relationship evolve organically. "I'm not talking about marriage," Clara clarified quickly. "Neither of us is ready for that, might never be ready for that, and that's okay. But I want Amelia to have security. I want her to know that you're not just a roommate or a friend, but actual family. And I want to make sure that if something happens to me, you're her guardian, that you're legally recognized as someone who has the right to make decisions for her." Clara, let me finish. "I've talked to my lawyer about what options exist. We could do a legal guardianship arrangement where you'd become her co-guardian. We could look into you adopting her as a second parent, though that's complicated when there's no romantic relationship. Or we could keep things as they are legally, but put it in my will that you're her guardian if I die." Clara took a breath. "I wanted to know what you're comfortable with before I make any decisions." Ethan thought about Amelia, about this child who'd watched him from her window and somehow seen past his grief to the person underneath. He thought about bedtime stories and homework help and the way she called him Uncle Ethan, but with a weight that suggested the title meant more than casual friendship. He thought about Emma and Jacob, about the children he'd lost and would never stop missing, and about whether it was betrayal to love another child with that same fierce protective instinct. But he knew Sarah would have told him it wasn't betrayal, but honor. That loving Amelia didn't diminish his love for Emma and Jacob, but rather extended it, proof that his capacity for fatherly love hadn't died with his children, but had simply been waiting for someone else to need it. "I want to be her guardian," Ethan said. "Co-guardian. Adoption. Whatever makes the most sense legally. I love her, Clara. She's not my daughter by blood, but she's my daughter in every way that matters. And if something happened to you, I'd want to make sure she's taken care of, that she knows she's not alone, that she has someone who will fight for her the way you fought for her." Clara's eyes filled with tears. "Thank you, God, thank you. I didn't realize how worried I was about this until just now." Amelia's already lost her father. The thought of her losing me too and ending up with some distant relative who doesn't really know her, who doesn't understand what she's been through. She wiped at her eyes. "You're her family, Ethan. You have been since the night you carried her out of that fire. I just wanted to make it official." They worked with lawyers over the following weeks to establish a co-guardianship arrangement. It was complicated. Ethan wasn't married to Clara, wasn't biologically related to Amelia, wasn't even technically a step-parent. But Clara had enough money to hire lawyers who could figure out the complexities, and eventually they had documents that legally recognized Ethan as having parental rights and responsibilities for Amelia. They sat her down and explained it in terms she could understand, that Uncle Ethan was officially her family now, that he'd help take care of her and make decisions about her life, that he'd be there for her no matter what. "So you're like my dad now?" Amelia asked, trying to work through the implications. "I could never replace your father," Ethan said carefully. "Daniel will always be your dad, and you should always remember him and love him. But yes, I'm taking on a dad-like role in your life. Does that feel okay to you?" Amelia thought about it with the seriousness she brought to all important questions. "Can I call you Dad? Or would that be weird?" Ethan felt his heart crack open. "You can call me whatever feels right to you. Uncle Ethan, Dad, just Ethan. Whatever you're comfortable with. I think I want to call you Dad Miles, because you're a different dad than Daddy was, but you're still dad-shaped." Amelia grinned at her own logic. "And when I'm older and I tell people about my family, I can say I had two dads. Daddy who died when I was little, and Dad Miles who saved me from the fire and stayed." "Dad Miles," Ethan repeated, testing the words. They felt strange and wonderful and terrifying all at once. "I'd be honored to be Dad Miles." The summer brought the one-year anniversary of the Phoenix Center's opening, and with it a celebration that drew people from across the city. All of the original families were there, most of them having moved on to permanent housing but maintaining connections to the community they'd built during their darkest times. New families had moved in to take their places, continuing the cycle of rescue and rebuilding. Clara's foundation had raised enough money to start construction on Phoenix Centers in 3 other cities, each one designed by Ethan using Daniel's original concepts adapted to local needs. But the centerpiece of the anniversary celebration was the memorial garden they'd created in the courtyard. Bronze plaques listed the names of everyone who died in fires in Chicago over the past decade, including Sarah, Emma, Jacob, and Daniel. It wasn't just a memorial to the dead, but a promise to the living, that their losses wouldn't be forgotten, that something good could rise from even the most terrible tragedies, that love and community and purpose could grow in soil fertilized by grief. Ethan stood in front of the plaque bearing his family's names and felt Clara's hand slip into his left hand and Amelia's into his right. They stood together, this chosen family born from fire and loss, and the decision to keep living anyway. And Ethan finally understood what Sarah had meant about houses with many rooms. He'd spent 6 years locked in the room of sorrow, convinced it was the only room he deserved, the only room that made sense after losing everything. But Clara and Amelia had opened doors he didn't know existed, had shown him that grief and joy could coexist, that you could honor the dead while embracing the living, that the human heart was vast enough to hold both terrible loss and unexpected gifts. "Do you think they can see us?" Amelia asked, looking at the names on the plaque. "All the people who died. Do you think they know what we built?" "I think," Ethan said slowly, choosing his words with care, "that if there's any kind of afterlife, if there's any way for the dead to remain connected to us, they see us in the way that matters most. Not watching us like a movie, but living on through the choices we make, the love we share, the way we refuse to let their deaths be the end of the story." Your dad is in this building because we used his designs. My family is in the work we do helping other families survive their own fires. They're not gone as long as we keep carrying them forward." "I like that," Amelia decided. "It means they're not really dead. They're just different. Like the phoenix in the fountain. They burned away, but they turned into something else. Something that helps people." Out of the mouths of children, Ethan thought for what must have been the 100th time. This 8-year-old understood transformation in a way that many adults never grasped. She understood that death wasn't the opposite of life, but part of it. That loss created space for new forms of love. That the people we'd been and the people we'd become were all part of the same continuous story. As the sun set over Chicago, turning the Phoenix Center golden in the late light, Ethan felt something he'd thought was impossible 6 years ago. He felt grateful. Not grateful for the fire or the deaths or the trauma, but grateful for the unexpected gift of this new family, this meaningful work, this second chance at a life that mattered. Grateful that on one December night, a little girl had watched from her window and believed in him when he didn't believe in himself. Grateful that grief hadn't killed him, that purpose had found him even in his darkest moment, that love had proven stronger than loss. The night ended with everyone gathered in the central courtyard, surrounded by the memorial garden and the fountain with its bronze phoenix, and Ethan was asked to say a few words. He looked at the faces around him, families who'd survived their own fires, literal and metaphorical, people who'd lost everything and were learning to build new lives from the ashes. He looked at Clara and Amelia, at his mother and stepfather who'd flown in for the celebration, at Detective Harris and Monica Chen, and all the people who'd helped ensure that Richard Hale faced justice. He looked at the building itself, this monument to resilience and hope that he and Daniel had created together across the barrier of death. 1 year ago, Ethan began, this place opened its doors to people who'd lost everything. We called it the Phoenix Center because we believed in rebirth, in rising from ashes, in the possibility of transformation. But what I've learned over this year is that being a phoenix isn't a one-time event. It's a daily choice. Every morning, we wake up and decide whether to stay in the ashes or to rise from them. Some days rising is easy. Some days it takes everything we have just to get out of bed. But every day that we choose life over despair, action over paralysis, hope over cynicism, every one of those days we're being the phoenix. We're proving that fire doesn't get the last word. He paused, gathering his thoughts. I lost my family to fire. Clara and Amelia nearly died in one. Everyone here has their own story of loss, their own fire that burned down the life they'd built. But look at us now. Look at this building, this community, these children playing safely while their parents rebuild. Look at what we've created together. The fires tried to destroy us. Instead, they forged us into something stronger than we were before. They taught us that we're more resilient than we knew, more capable of survival than we imagined, more deserving of second chances than we believed. Ethan felt his voice thicken with emotion, but pushed through. To everyone who's walked through the doors of the Phoenix Center this year, thank you for letting us be part of your journey. Thank you for trusting us with your stories. Thank you for choosing to rise when staying down would have been easier. You inspire me every single day. You remind me why this work matters, why hope isn't naive but revolutionary, why love persists even after the worst has happened. He looked directly at Clara and Amelia, and to my family, because that's what you are, my family in every way that matters. Thank you for saving me. I ran into a burning building to save you, but you're the ones who really did the saving. You reminded me that life continues, that families form in unexpected ways, that grief doesn't have to be the end of the story, but can be the beginning of a new chapter. I love you both more than I have words for. Amelia was crying, Clara was crying, and Ethan realized he was crying too. But they were good tears, healing tears, tears that washed away some of the accumulated pain of the past 6 years and left something cleaner, clearer, more alive in its place. The crowd applauded, and someone started singing, and soon everyone joined in, their voices rising together in the twilight, carrying hope and healing and the promise of tomorrow into the gathering dark. The Phoenix Center glowed with light from every window, a beacon in the Chicago night, proof that from the ashes of tragedy, something beautiful could rise. Ethan stood with his arm around Clara's shoulders and Amelia pressed against his side, and he thought about the journey that had brought them here. The The grief and guilt, the fire and rescue, the trial and vindication, the slow, painful work of rebuilding lives that had been shattered. He thought about Sarah and Emma and Jacob, about Daniel, about all the people who died in fires who couldn't be here to see what their deaths had inspired. And he made them a promise in the silence of his heart that he would keep building, keep helping, keep choosing life and hope and love. Keep being the phoenix that rose from the ashes of loss to create something that mattered. Because in the end, that was all any of them could do. Keep rising, keep building, keep believing that tomorrow could be better than yesterday. Keep loving even though love meant risking loss. Keep opening your heart even though hearts could break. Keep being brave enough to walk toward fire instead of away from it, because sometimes the thing you fear most is exactly where you need to go to find what you've been missing. The phoenix didn't rise from the ashes once. It rose again and again, every day, every moment, every time it chose transformation over destruction, hope over despair, life over the comfortable numbness of merely existing. And standing in the courtyard of the center that bore his best friend's name, surrounded by the family he'd found and the community they'd built together, Ethan Miles finally understood what it meant to be truly alive again. The fire had taken everything, but it hadn't won. Because they were still here, still rising, still proving that love was stronger than loss and hope was stronger than despair, and the human spirit was more resilient than any flame. They were the phoenix, all of them, rising together from the ashes of their separate tragedies into something that looked remarkably like grace.